As always, if you enjoy the story, please hit that like button. If you have a location idea for future stories, so if there's a specific town or city, drop the name in the comments below. Now, let's get started.
Chapter 1. Pigs, Posts, and a Problem. Of all the stubborn, mule-headed, cantankerous things in this world, I was currently at war with an inanimate object, a fence post. It stared back at me, a defiant stick of cedar wedged halfway into a hole that was, apparently, filled with something as dense as granite. "Come on, you splintery son of a birch," I grunted, wiggling it back and forth. Sweat trickled down my temples, plastering stray strands of my brown ponytail to my cheeks. It's a simple concept. You go in the hole, you stand up straight, we become friends. Why are you making this so difficult? The post, predictably, did not answer. It just sat there, smugly askew. This was my life now. After a 4-year tour of duty at a fancy Chicago university, and a 2-year sentence in a relationship that went south so fast it hit Antarctica, I was back home. Back in Oak Creek, the kind of Midwest town where the biggest news was a new flavor of slushie at the gas station. I'd traded skyscrapers for silos, sirens for crickets, and my pretentious ex-boyfriend Paul for a nemesis made of wood. Honestly, it was an upgrade. My family's 10 acres weren't a real farm, more of a hobby farm my dad had insisted on. It meant we had just enough land and just enough animals to keep us perpetually busy and slightly smelly. Today's project was patching the fence around the pen for Hamlet, our new Kunekune pig, who had the escape artist skills of a tiny pink Houdini. I gave the post one more mighty shove, my boots slipped in the soft dirt, and I went down, landing hard on my backside with an unladylike oomph. My jeans were now officially more dirt than denim. "Okay, new plan," I said to a particularly interested-looking chicken who had wandered over to spectate. "We're going to use tactical negotiation. Post, if you cooperate, I will. I don't know. Not use you for firewood this winter." A low, rumbling chuckle drifted over from the property line. "Talking to the fence again, Emmy?" My head snapped up. My heart did a little flip-flop that I immediately told it to knock off. Leaning against the shared fence that separated our property from the vast Colten ranch was Nash Colten himself. He was the picture of a modern-day cowboy. Dusty boots, worn-in jeans that fit him in ways that should be illegal, a simple gray t-shirt that stretched across a chest built from years of hauling hay and wrestling cattle, and a faded ball cap pulled low over his eyes. Even from 20 yards away, I could see the familiar crinkles at the corners of his eyes when he smiled that lazy, heart-stopping smile. Nash Colten, my childhood protector, my adolescent crush, and my current, very handsome, next-door neighbor problem. He was 7 years my senior, a gap that had felt like a chasm when I was 12, and he was a 19-year-old god heading off to college. He'd always been there, patching up my scraped knees, teaching me how to skip stones, and chasing off any bullies who dared to bother the scruffy tomboy next door. Then he'd left, and I'd grown up. He'd come back, a full-grown man of 24, ready to take over his family's legacy, but by then, I was already gone, off to college myself. Now here we were. I was 24, he was 31, and the chasm had shrunk to a very tense, very electric, and very confusing little gap. "I'm not talking to the fence," I retorted, scrambling to my feet and dusting off my jeans with as much dignity as I could muster. I was giving it a structural integrity assessment, out loud. He pushed off the fence and ambled over, his long-legged stride eating up the distance between us. He moved with an easy confidence that I was pretty sure was a prerequisite for owning that much land. Right. A. Structural integrity assessment. And how'd it go? Did it pass? It failed spectacularly. It's insubordinate. He stopped in front of me, looking down at the crooked post and then at me, a glint of amusement in his hazel eyes. He smelled like sawdust, fresh air, and something that was just uniquely Nash. It was a scent that instantly transported me back to being a kid, trailing after him like a lost puppy. Insubordinate, huh? Let me see. He crouched down, his hands, calloused and capable, wrapping around the post. Looks like you hit a rock down there. With a few practiced twists and a grunt of effort, he worked the post loose and pulled it from the hole. He reached in, his arm disappearing up to the shoulder, and pulled out a cantaloupe-sized rock. He tossed it aside with a thud. "Show off?" I muttered, crossing my arms. He grinned. That easy, heart-melting grin. "Just a little rancher know-how. Here, let me give you a hand." Before I could protest, he'd positioned the post back in the hole. "All right, hold it steady." I placed my hands on the wood, and he placed his right over mine to help brace it. A jolt, sharp and warm, shot up my arms. His hands were huge, dwarfing mine, and the heat from them seemed to seep right through my skin. I suddenly forgot how to breathe. My entire brain went offline, replaced by a single, flashing neon sign that just said, "Hands." "You okay, Emmy?" "You're looking a little flushed," he said, his voice a low rumble right next to my ear. "Fine," I squeaked, my voice an octave higher than usual. "Just hot. The sun. It's very sunny. Smooth, Brooks. Real smooth. You sound like a weather report." He chuckled again, a sound that vibrated right through the post and into my bones. He grabbed the heavy post driver, a weighted steel tube with handles, and with a few powerful, rhythmic thumps, he drove the post deep into the ground. It stood perfectly straight. Annoyingly, perfectly straight. "There," he said, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow with the back of his wrist. "All secure." "Thanks," I mumbled, trying to get my pulse to return to a non-hummingbird-like rhythm. I took a step back, needing to put some space between us before I did something stupid, like lick him. "Where did that come from?" "Bad Emily! Down, girl!" "Anytime," he said, leaning against the newly secured post. He looked at me, his gaze softening. "It's good to have you back, Emmy. The place wasn't the same without you." My carefully constructed wall of sarcastic self-defense crumbled a little. Yeah, well, Chicago wasn't all it was cracked up to be. That was the understatement of the century. It was a beautiful city filled with ugly memories, chief among them being Paul Sanders. Nash seemed to sense the shadow that crossed my face. He'd been there in the immediate aftermath, a quiet, steady presence when I'd shown up on my parents' doorstep 2 months ago with a broken heart and 2 suitcases. He hadn't pushed or prodded, just offered to help fix things, whether it was a leaky faucet or, apparently, a stubborn fence post. "Well, their loss is our gain," he said lightly, his eyes scanning my face. "You seem better." "Fresh air and manual labor will do that," I said with a shrug, trying to deflect. "Better than spreadsheets and a passive-aggressive boyfriend." The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. I hadn't meant to bring Paul up. He was the Voldemort of my life story, the ex who must not be named. Nash's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only sign that he'd registered the comment. He hated Paul, a fact he'd made clear with a few choice, clipped words after seeing me cry over one of Paul's manipulative phone calls a few weeks back. Before the silence could get too awkward, a high-pitched squeal and a frantic series of grunts erupted from the barn. We both turned. The barn door, which I had most definitely latched, was swinging open, and bursting forth like a small pink cannonball was Hamlet, my renegade pig. He shot across the yard, his little legs pumping, a look of pure, unadulterated freedom in his beady eyes. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," I yelled, breaking into a run. "Hamlet, get back here." Hamlet, who apparently did not respond to his Shakespearean name, picked up speed, heading directly for the newly planted vegetable garden my mom had been babying all spring. No, not the tomatoes," I shrieked. "She'll kill me, then she'll kill you. Then she'll use us both as compost." Nash was laughing. Actually, full-on, deep-bellied laughing. I shot him a glare over my shoulder as I sprinted past. "A little help, Cowboy?" That seemed to snap him into action. With the grace of an athlete, he vaulted over the fence he'd just helped me fix and joined the chase. "Head him off!" "I'll try to circle him back toward the barn," he yelled. What followed was 5 minutes of the most ridiculous, undignified chase of my life. Hamlet was surprisingly agile, juking and weaving like a star running back. I zigged, he zagged. Nash lunged, Hamlet spun, leaving Nash to stumble into the mud puddle near the water trough. I skidded to a halt, trying not to laugh as Nash came up sputtering, a streak of mud across his cheek. He looked at me, a dangerous glint in his eye. "Oh, it's funny, is it?" "Hilarious," I confirmed, before yelping and dodging as Hamlet charged straight for my legs. I tripped over a stray rake, because of course there was a stray rake, and went down, landing with a squish right beside Nash in the mud puddle. Now we were both a mess, covered in mud, breathless, and our quarry was currently trying to dig up my mom's prize-winning zucchini. We looked at each other, and the absurdity of it all hit me. I started to giggle, which quickly turned into a full-blown laugh. Nash joined in, his laughter echoing across the yard. For a moment, we were just 2 kids again, covered in mud and getting into trouble. "Okay," he said, catching his breath and pushing himself up on his elbows. New plan. On 3, we both charge him. No more finesse. Just overwhelming force. Got it. Overwhelming pig-tackling force. We crawled out of the mud, squelching with every movement. We crept toward the garden, flanking the oblivious, dirt-snuffling pig. 1, Nash whispered. 2, I breathed, bracing myself. 3, we charged. It was not elegant, it was not graceful, but it was effective. I dove for his front half, and Nash went for his back. We collided in a tangle of limbs and pig, and somehow we managed to pin him. Hamlet let out a squeal of profound indignation. I got him! I grunted, my face pressed into his surprisingly coarse, muddy side. Me too, Nash said, his voice strained. He was practically lying on top of me, his chest pressed against my back, his arm wrapped around the pig, and, by extension, me. The world seemed to slow down. All I could feel was the solid weight of him, the heat of his body through our mud-soaked shirts, and the thumping of his heart against my shoulder blades. The pig stopped struggling, and in the sudden quiet, the only sound was our ragged breathing. We should probably get him back in the pen, I said, my voice sounding breathy and strange. Yeah, Nash said, but he didn't move. His arm was still around me, holding me close, in a minute. He shifted slightly, and I twisted my head to look at him. His face was inches from mine. The laughter was gone from his eyes, replaced by something intense and serious. His gaze dropped to my lips, and my breath hitched. The mud, the pig, the wrecked garden, it all faded away. There was only the space between us, crackling with a tension that had nothing to do with escaped livestock. He was going to kiss me, right here, in the mud, smelling like pig. And the craziest part? I wanted him to. More than I'd wanted anything, in a very long time. I leaned in, just a fraction of an inch. Squawk! A chicken, the same one from before, chose that exact moment to hop onto my back, letting out a squawk of victory as if she'd just conquered Mount Emily. The spell was broken. We both jumped, scrambling apart as Hamlet took the opportunity to wriggle free. Nash made a grab for him, finally scooping the muddy pig into his arms. Well, I said, pushing my messy hair out of my face and trying to ignore the furious blush creeping up my neck. That was a thing. Nash cleared his throat, a faint flush on his own cheeks. Never a dull moment with you, Brooks. He carried the squirming pig back to the pen, securely latching the gate this time. He came back to where I was still sitting in the mud, looking like a swamp monster, and offered me a hand. I took it, and he pulled me to my feet easily. His hand lingered in mine for a second too long before he let go. Listen, Emmy, he started, suddenly looking a little nervous. The town's Founders' Day picnic is this Saturday. I was wondering if you're not busy wrestling livestock, if you'd want to go with me. My heart did another one of those stupid flips. A date. Nash Colten was asking me on a date. I'd love to, I said, a real, genuine smile spreading across my face. Great, he said, his own smile returning, brighter than before. I'll pick you up around noon? It's a date. He lingered for another moment, his eyes holding mine, before he finally nodded and turned to go. See you Saturday, Emmy. I watched him go, a goofy, mud-caked grin plastered on my face. I felt light, hopeful. For the first time since coming home, I felt like maybe things were actually going to be okay. Maybe this was my chance for a real, classic love story. I headed inside, peeling off my muddy clothes at the door and making a beeline for the shower. As the hot water washed the grime away, I couldn't stop replaying the afternoon in my head. The chase, the fall, that almost kiss. Clean and wrapped in a towel, I padded into my bedroom, feeling happier than I had in years. That's when I heard it. The sound of a car engine coming down our long gravel driveway. It wasn't my dad's truck or my mom's SUV. This engine was different. Smoother, quieter, and somehow wrong. I crept to my window, pushing aside the curtain. My stomach plummeted to my feet, the newfound happiness evaporating like mist. Parked next to my beat-up pickup truck was a sleek, black BMW, so out of place in our dusty yard, it might as well have been a spaceship. And leaning against the driver's side door, looking as cool and proprietary as ever in his designer jeans and polo shirt, was the one person I never wanted to see again. Paul Sanders. He looked up, his eyes locking directly onto my window as if he knew I was there. A slow, cold smile spread across his face. He had found me. Chapter 2. Uninvited and Unwelcome. For a solid 10 seconds, my brain refused to process the image. It was a cognitive dissonance of the highest order. The man in the $1,000 loafers standing next to the car that cost more than our barn did not belong here. He was a glitch in the Matrix, a perfectly photoshopped image dropped into the wrong background. My world was supposed to be dirt, sweat, and the potential for a sweet, simple romance with the boy next door. It was not supposed to include the tailored, toxic ghost of boyfriends past. Paul Sanders. In my yard, the happy, hopeful bubble that had inflated around my heart just moments before popped with a sickening, silent splat. Okay, Emily. Do not panic, I told myself, my knuckles white on the windowsill. He can't get you. You're in a towel. It's like being invisible to velociraptors, but for manipulative exes. He's probably just lost. Yes, that's it. He took a wrong turn on his way to hell, probably, but he wasn't lost. His gaze was fixed on my window, that lazy, arrogant smile playing on his lips. It was the same smile he'd used to charm my college professors, my friends, and for a heartbreakingly long time, me. Now it just made my stomach clench. He knew I was there. He'd probably been watching the whole ridiculous pig chase, judging me from the air-conditioned comfort of his German-engineered bubble. My first instinct was to drop to the floor and crawl away. My second was to find the biggest, heaviest object in my room and hurl it through the glass. I settled on a third, more practical option, getting dressed. I yanked open my dresser drawers, my hands trembling slightly. I pulled on the oldest, most comfortable pair of jeans I owned, the ones with a small paint stain on the knee, and a faded t-shirt from a local 5K race I'd run in high school. It was my armor. Nothing screamed, I have moved on and am living a simple, fulfilling life you couldn't possibly comprehend, quite like worn-out charity run apparel. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I marched out of my room and down the stairs, my bare feet slapping against the cool wood floors. My mom was in the kitchen, humming as she chopped vegetables for dinner. She glanced up, her smile warm. Honey, you look like you've been mud wrestling. Did you and Hamlet come to an understanding? She asked, her eyes twinkling. Then she saw my face. The smile faltered. Emmy, what's wrong? Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Not a knock. A crisp, two-toned chime. No one in Oak Creek used the doorbell. Friends and neighbors walked in through the back door. The only people who used the doorbell were salesmen and, apparently, soul-sucking demons from Chicago. I'll get it, I said, my voice tight. My mom put down her knife, her expression clouded with concern. Who on earth? I didn't let her finish. I strode to the front door and pulled it open, determined to project an aura of unbothered, rural tranquility. Paul was leaning against the porch railing, one ankle crossed over the other, looking entirely too pleased with himself. He was the picture of urban sophistication. Crisp polo shirt, perfectly coiffed dark hair, a watch on his wrist that could probably pay off my student loans. He smelled of expensive cologne, a scent that now made me feel vaguely nauseous. Emily, darling, he said, his voice as smooth as polished marble. There you are. For a minute, I thought you might be hiding from me. He let his eyes roam over my outfit, a faint, condescending smirk touching his lips. Very rustic. Is this what the locals are wearing this season? Hello, Paul, I said, my voice flat. I crossed my arms over my chest, blocking the doorway with my body. You're trespassing. What do you want? Trespassing? That's a bit harsh. I came all this way to see you. I was worried. His expression shifted to one of practiced concern, the look he used when he was about to tell me my ambitions were cute, but unrealistic. You just disappeared, Emmy. No note, just a childish text message. That's not like you. Actually, it's exactly like me. It's the new me. The me who doesn't stick around to be told her feelings are an overreaction. His smile tightened. We had an argument. Couples argue. You didn't have to run away to this. He gestured vaguely at the fields and trees surrounding our house, as if it were a leper colony. I've come to take you home. Back to our life. This is my home, Paul. And that was never our life. It was your life. And you were just gracious enough to let me have a walk-on role. The words came out stronger than I expected, fueled by 2 months of distance and the lingering adrenaline from my almost kiss with Nash. For the first time, Paul's carefully constructed composure seemed to crack. A flicker of genuine annoyance flashed in his dark eyes. Don't be dramatic, Emily. You love the city. You love the galas, the gallery openings. You're not meant to be covered in whatever that is, he said, wrinkling his nose at a smudge of mud still on my arm. Look, I even brought you something. He reached back into his car and produced a large, elegant bouquet of lilies. My stomach twisted. He knew I was allergic to lilies. It wasn't a mistake. It was a power play. A reminder that he only listened to what he wanted to hear. I'm not coming back, Paul. You need to leave. Now. We're not done talking about this. He took a step forward, trying to push past me into the house. Yes, we are. A new voice, low and firm, cut through the tension. We both turned. Nash was standing at the edge of the porch, not 10 feet away. He must have come around the side of the house. He wasn't leaning or slouching now. He stood tall, his arms hanging loose at his sides, but there was a coiled stillness about him that hadn't been there before. He had the same worn jeans on, the same gray t-shirt, now with a prominent muddy streak across the front. He looked messy, grounded, and about as immovable as an ancient oak tree. The setting sun caught the hazel in his eyes, turning them hard and bright. Paul's eyes narrowed, taking in Nash from his dusty boots to his faded ball cap. He sized him up and dismissed him in one contemptuous glance. "I'm sorry," Paul said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Can I help you? I'm having a private conversation with my girlfriend." "First of all," I snapped, "I'm not your girlfriend. Second, this is Nash Colten. He's my neighbor." "Ah." "The neighbor," Paul said, a cruel little smile on his face. He looked Nash up and down again. "Does the lady of the house have some chores for you? Mowing the lawn, perhaps? Tilling the soil?" He said the word soil, like it was something foul he'd scraped off his shoe. Nash didn't rise to the bait. He just took another slow step forward, his gaze locked on Paul. "The lady of the house told you to leave." "And I'll leave when I'm ready," Paul retorted, puffing out his chest. He turned his back on Nash, a deliberate and insulting dismissal, and focused on me again. "Emmy, stop this foolishness. Pack a bag. We can be back in Chicago in time for a late dinner at La Coloniale." "She's not going anywhere with you," Nash said. His voice was quiet, but it carried an unmistakable weight of authority that made the air crackle. Paul spun around, his face flushed with anger. "Who the hell do you think you are? This has nothing to do with you, farm boy. It has everything to do with me when you're on her porch, refusing to respect what she's telling you," Nash said, taking another step. He was now standing right beside me, a solid, warm wall of protective energy. He didn't touch me, but I could feel his presence like a shield. He was taller than Paul, broader in the shoulders. Where Paul was built by a personal trainer in a climate-controlled gym, Nash was built by the land itself. "I'm warning you, pal." "Back off," Paul snarled, jabbing a finger in Nash's direction. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was escalating. This was my fault. I had let Paul have too much power for too long, and now he thought he could just show up and claim me. I had to be the one to end this. I couldn't let Nash fight my battles for me, no matter how much a part of me wanted to hide behind him. I stepped forward, putting myself slightly in front of Nash. I looked Paul dead in the eye, channeling every ounce of frustration and anger I'd suppressed for 2 years. "No, Paul, you back off," I said, my voice shaking only slightly. "This is my home. This is my life. You are not welcome here. I have asked you to leave. I am now telling you, get in your ridiculously expensive car, take your passive-aggressive flowers with you, and get off my property. If I see you here again, I will call the sheriff. Do you understand me?" For a moment, there was just silence. Paul stared at me, his mask of charm completely gone, replaced by a cold reptilian fury. He looked from my defiant face to Nash's stony one. He saw a united front. He saw that he had lost control. With a sneer, he threw the bouquet of lilies onto the porch steps. "Fine," he spat. "Stay here and rot in this pathetic little town. Play house with your pet farmer. You'll come crawling back when you realize what you've thrown away." He turned on his heel, stalked to his car without a backward glance, and got in. The engine purred to life, a sound as alien as his presence. He peeled out of our driveway, spitting gravel against my dad's pickup truck, and disappeared down the road, leaving a cloud of dust and the cloying scent of his cologne hanging in the air. The silence he left behind was deafening. My entire body was trembling with leftover adrenaline. I stared at the crushed lilies on the steps, their white petals bruised and torn. "You okay?" Nash's voice was soft, pulling me back to the present. I turned to look at him. The hardness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, unwavering concern that made my throat tighten. "Yeah," I managed, my voice raspy. "Yeah, I'm okay. Just peachy." I attempted to smile, but I was pretty sure it came out as more of a grimace. "He seems like a real piece of work," Nash said, his jaw still tight. "You have no idea," I muttered, kicking at a loose stone on the porch. "I'm sorry you had to see that. That he was like that. To you. Don't apologize for him, Emmy. You've got nothing to be sorry for." He reached out, his hand hovering for a second before he gently rested it on my shoulder. His touch was grounding, a stark contrast to the cold dread Paul had inspired. The warmth from his calloused palms seeped through my thin t-shirt, chasing away some of the chill that had settled deep in my bones. "You handled that perfectly. You were strong." I looked up at him, surprised. I didn't feel strong. I felt like a frayed electrical wire, shaken and raw. But seeing the genuine admiration in his eyes made me stand a little straighter. "Thanks, Nash. For being here." "Always," he said, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a platitude. It was a promise. The same promise he'd been making me with his actions since we were kids. My mom chose that moment to peek her head out the door, her face a mask of worry. "Is everything all right?" I heard shouting. Her eyes darted from me to Nash, then to the dust cloud settling on the driveway. "Everything's fine, Mom," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "Just an old acquaintance from Chicago who got lost." She didn't look convinced, but she nodded, her gaze lingering on Nash's hand, which was still resting on my shoulder. A flicker of something knowing and hopeful crossed her face before she schooled her features. "Well, all right. Nash, would you like to stay for dinner? I'm making my pot roast." My mom's pot roast was legendary. It was her solution to everything from bad grades to bad breakups. It was a culinary hug. Nash's thumb stroked my shoulder gently before he dropped his hand. "I'd love to, Mrs. Brooks, but I've got to check on a mare that's due any day now. Thank you, though." He looked back at me. "Are we still on for Saturday?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Has he ruined this? Are you going to retreat? The thought of letting Paul's poison seep into the one good, hopeful thing that had happened to me in months made a new kind of resolve harden in my gut. "No, absolutely not." "You bet," I said, and this time my smile was real. "You, me, and a whole town's supply of questionable potato salad. I wouldn't miss it." His answering grin was slow and warm, and it reached all the way to his eyes. It was like the sun coming out after a storm. "Good, I'll pick you up at noon." He gave me one last long look, a look that said more than words ever could, before he nodded to my mom and headed back across the lawn toward his own property. I watched him go, his easy, long-legged stride a comforting and familiar sight. I bent down and gathered the crushed lilies, my nose starting to itch. I walked them straight to the garbage can at the side of the house and shoved them in, burying them under an old newspaper. A symbolic burial for a dead and buried part of my life. When I walked back inside, the rich, savory smell of my mom's pot roast filled the house. It smelled like safety. It smelled like home. The battle was over for today. But as I leaned against the closed door, I knew the war wasn't. Paul wasn't the type to accept defeat. He'd be back. But for the first time, the thought didn't fill me with pure terror. Because this time, I wasn't alone. This time, I had a stubborn pig, a muddy yard, a family who loved me, and a cowboy next door. And that felt like a pretty good army to have on my side. Chapter 3. Pot Roast, Paranoia, and Preparations. The rich, savory aroma of Mom's pot roast wrapped around me like a warm blanket the moment I stepped inside, a stark contrast to the lingering, cloying scent of Paul's cologne that clung to the porch air. It was the smell of safety, of home, a culinary declaration that the monsters had been banished from the doorstep. For a little while, at least. My dad, Mike Brooks, was at the kitchen table, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he scanned the local paper. He was a man of few words and sturdy build, a high school history teacher who'd rather spend his weekends building chicken coops than grading papers. He looked up as I came in, his blue eyes, so much like my own, crinkling at the corners. He took in my disheveled state, the mud on my jeans, and the lingering tension in my shoulders. "Rough day at the office?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "You could say that," I said, sliding into a chair opposite him. "Hamlet staged a breakout during a critical fence post negotiation. And I saw you had a visitor," my mom added, her back to us as she stirred gravy on the stove. Her tone was casual, but I knew her better than that. It was the kind of casual that was reverse-engineered from 1,000 possible disaster scenarios. Fancy car. Didn't look like he was selling encyclopedias. I sighed, picking at a loose thread on the placemat. That was Paul. The silence that followed was heavy. The only sound was the gentle bubbling of the gravy. My dad folded his newspaper with deliberate precision, placing it squarely in the center of the table. He took off his glasses and started cleaning them with the hem of his shirt. It was his pre-lecture ritual. "Paul Sanders from Chicago," my dad stated. "Not a question. The one and only," I confirmed, trying for a lightheartedness I didn't feel. "What did he want?" Mom asked, turning around. a wooden spoon dripping with gravy in her hand. Her face was a carefully constructed mask of neutrality, but her knuckles were white. "The usual," I said with a shrug, to inform me that my life choices are incorrect and that I should immediately return to the city so he can resume managing my personality for me. "And?" Dad pressed, his gaze sharp, and I told him to get lost. Nash was there. He helped. A flicker of relief passed between my parents. My dad nodded slowly, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "Nash is a good man. Always has been." "He's staying for dinner?" Mom asked, a hopeful note in her voice. "He couldn't. Had to check on a mare." "A shame," she said, but she was smiling now. She brought the platter of pot roast to the table, surrounded by roasted carrots and potatoes. It was a feast of comfort. "Well, I'm glad you sent that person packing. You look happier here, Emmy, like you can finally breathe." She was right. But as we ate, a cold knot of anxiety remained in my stomach. Paul's parting sneer echoed in my head. "You'll come crawling back." He wasn't the type to accept no for an answer. He saw it as a temporary setback, a problem to be solved with the right application of pressure and manipulation. I kept picturing his black BMW parked somewhere just out of sight, him watching, waiting. Every time a car passed on the main road, my head would snap up, my fork pausing halfway to my mouth. "Stop it, Emily," I chided myself. "You can't let him live rent-free in your head. He doesn't get to have this space anymore." I focused on the conversation, on my dad's complaints about the school board, and my mom's excitement about her burgeoning zucchini plants, the ones Hamlet had thankfully failed to uproot. I focused on the solid, comforting reality of my family. But later that night, as I lay in my childhood bed, the familiar pattern of moonlight filtering through the maple tree outside my window, the paranoia came creeping back. My phone lay on my nightstand, a silent black rectangle. I had the urge to check it, to see if he'd texted, if he'd called. I had blocked his number months ago, but he was resourceful. He'd find a way if he wanted to. I resisted the impulse, rolling over and burying my face in my pillow. I was not that person anymore. I would not wait by the phone for a man's approval or his anger. Instead, I let my thoughts drift to Nash, to the easy confidence of his stride, the warmth of his hands over mine, the deep, rumbling sound of his laugh. I thought of the way he'd stood on the porch, a silent, immovable mountain between me and Paul. He hadn't needed to yell or posture. His presence alone was a shield. And that almost kissed my stomach, did a nervous flutter kick just thinking about it. In the middle of a muddy pigsty, it had felt more real and more right than any of the sterile, performative kisses Paul had ever given me. "Okay, new plan," I whispered into the dark. "Focus on the good, focus on Saturday. A picnic, with a boy. A nice, non-manipulative, smells-like sawdust boy. You can do this." The next day, Friday, dawned bright and clear, a perfect Midwestern summer day. The air was thick with the scent of cut grass and blooming honeysuckle. The confrontation with Paul felt like a bad dream, hazy and distant in the morning light. I spent the morning helping my dad replace a few rotting boards on the barn wall, the rhythmic work a balm to my restless mind. "So, the Founders' Day picnic," my dad said, not looking at me as he lined up a nail. "With Nash." "Yep," I said, holding a board steady for him. "Good." He hammered the nail in with 3 economical swings. "You kids were always thick as thieves." "Dad, I'm 24. I don't think we qualify as kids anymore." He grunted, reaching for another nail. "You'll always be the scabby-kneed kid who tried to build a treehouse with duct tape and hope. And he'll always be the 19-year-old who had to climb up and get you down before you broke your neck." He paused, looking at me over the top of the board. "He's a good man, Emmy. Always looked out for you." It was the closest my dad would ever come to a heart-to-heart, and I knew what he was really saying. This one is different. This one is safe. Don't mess it up. After we finished, my mom sent me into town with a list. "We need more zip ties for the tomato cages Hamlet terrorized, and since you're going, grab a bag of that organic potting soil from Miller's Hardware." Miller's Hardware was an Oak Creek institution. It smelled perpetually of metal, fertilizer, and old wood, and was run by the equally institutional Mildred Miller, a woman with hair the color of a lavender bush and a gossip network that rivaled the CIA. The bell above the door chimed as I walked in, and there, in the aisle dedicated to farming equipment, was Nash. My heart did its signature lurch. He was holding a can of something, reading the label with intense concentration. He was wearing another simple t-shirt, this one a faded green that brought out the gold flecks in his hazel eyes, and jeans that were clean but softened with age. He looked so at home, so completely a part of his environment, that I felt a fresh wave of resentment for Paul and his condescending, pet farmer, comment. I took a breath. Assessing the structural integrity of that lubricant? I asked, walking up behind him. He turned and that slow, easy smile spread across his face. It hit me with the force of a physical blow. Hey, you! Nah, just trying to decide if I need the industrial grade or the super industrial grade. A guy's gotta be prepared for some serious squeaks. A problem I know all too well, I said, my cheeks feeling warm. My life is a series of squeaks and groans. His smile widened and he put the can back on the shelf. How are you doing? For real. His voice was lower now, his gaze serious. The humor was gone, replaced by the same genuine concern he'd shown me on the porch. I'm good, I said, and I was surprised to find I meant it. Really? A good night's sleep and some quality time with a hammer and nails did the trick. Thank you again for yesterday. I didn't do anything, he said, shaking his head. You handled it. You were a very effective and handsome human shield, I countered. Credit where credit is due. A faint flush crept up his neck. Nash Colten, the man who could wrestle a steer to the ground, was blushing because I called him handsome. The realization sent a giddy little thrill through me. Well, you're welcome. He cleared his throat and gestured to my mom's list in my hand. Stocking up for another project? Just some zip ties and soil. Mom's rebuilding her garden's defenses post-Hamlet. Good idea. He looked like he had a taste for zucchini. He fell into step beside me as I headed for the gardening section. We moved through the narrow aisles, our shoulders brushing occasionally. Each time, a little jolt of electricity shot through me. We talked about nothing and everything. His expectant mare, my dad's ongoing war with the squirrels, the questionable quality of the new slushy flavor at the gas station. It was easy. Effortless. It felt like coming home in a way I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Well, Emmy Brooks, look at you! A voice chirped from the front of the store. We both turned. Mildred Miller was leaning over the counter, her glasses perched on her nose, a wide, knowing grin on her face. Back in town for good, I hope. Just for now, Mildred, I said with a polite smile. And look at you, Nash Colten. Finally snagged her, did you? She said with a conspiratorial wink. Took you long enough. I always said you two were meant to be. Remember that time he pulled you out of Miller's pond after you fell through the ice trying to catch that frog? I felt the heat rise in my face as Nash chuckled awkwardly beside me. We're just catching up, Mildred, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Catching up, she repeated, drawing the words out. Right. Well, you two lovebirds, let me know if you need anything. We grabbed my items and made our way to the counter, the air thick with a new, slightly flustered energy. After paying, we stepped back out into the bright sunshine, blinking against the light. Sorry about that, Nash mumbled, shoving his hands in his pockets. Mildred's Mildred. It's okay. I laughed. I'd forgotten about the Oak Creek rumor mill. It's more efficient than the internet. Tell me about it. He looked at me, his expression unreadable for a moment. So, I'll see you tomorrow? Noon? Noon, I confirmed, my heart starting to beat a little faster in anticipation. Don't be late. I get very territorial about my choice of picnic blanket spot. Wouldn't dream of it, he said, his smile returning in full force. I watched him walk over to his dusty Ford F-250, give me one last little wave, and drive off. I stood there for a moment in the parking lot, clutching my bag of potting soil, feeling ridiculously, foolishly happy. This was good. This was real. Paul couldn't touch this. When I got home, my mom was on the porch, pruning her rose bushes. But as I pulled into the driveway, I saw it. Sitting on the top step, so enormous it was almost comical, was a vase. It was a crystal vase, the ostentatious kind Paul loved, and it was overflowing with at least 4 dozen pale pink peonies, my absolute favorite. My stomach dropped like a stone. The happiness I'd felt just moments before evaporated, replaced by an icy dread. Look what was just delivered, my mom called out, her voice bright with surprise. Aren't they breathtaking? The card is right there. I walked toward the porch like a prisoner walking to the gallows. There, propped against the vase, was a small, cream-colored envelope. My name was written on the front in Paul's elegant, sharp handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Emily, it read. I'm so sorry for my behavior yesterday. I was hurt and I acted like a child. I'm staying at the Creekside Inn because I can't bear to leave without making you understand how much I regret letting you go. Please, let me see you. Let me make it right. All my love, Paul. It was a tactical nuke disguised as an olive branch. It was perfect. It was apologetic, self-deprecating, and romantic. And it was a complete and utter lie This wasn't an apology. It was a move on a chessboard. He was showing me and my parents and the delivery guy and anyone else in this small town who might see that he was the penitent, loving boyfriend. He was painting me into a corner. If I rejected this grand gesture, I became the unreasonable one. I became the cold one. Well? My mom asked, her smile faltering as she saw the look on my face. What does it say? It's from Paul, I said, my voice flat and cold. He's still here. He's staying in town. The blood drained from her face. Oh, Emmy. I looked from the ridiculously beautiful flowers to my mom's worried expression. The anger started as a slow burn deep in my belly. He was not going to do this. He was not going to poison my home, my family, my one shot at something real and good. He was not going to ruin my date with Nash. An idea, bold and a little terrifying, solidified in my mind. I was done hiding. I was done being his victim. It was time to choose a side and to make it clear to everyone, including myself, which side I was on. Mom, can you put these in water? I asked, handing her the potting soil and zip ties. Without waiting for an answer, I hoisted the heavy crystal vase into my arms. The peonies, with their soft, ruffled petals, smelled sweet and cloying, like a beautiful lie. I turned and marched down the porch steps, my bare feet steady on the gravel driveway. I didn't head for the trash can. I walked right past our property line, through the gap in the fence, and started across the field toward the Colten's ranch house, the ridiculous, extravagant bouquet held out in front of me like a peace offering in a war he had started. I found Nash in the paddock, brushing down a beautiful chestnut mare. He looked up, his eyebrows shooting toward his hairline when he saw me. He took in my determined expression and the giant vase of flowers in my arms. Oh, he said, putting down his brush. Everything okay? No, I said, stopping in front of him. My heart was hammering, but my voice was steady. He's still here. He sent these. He's trying to get in my head before tomorrow. I watched his face. His jaw tightened, and a muscle ticked. The easygoing rancher disappeared, replaced by the protector I'd seen on my porch. He looked at the flowers with disgust. Then his eyes met mine, and they were filled with a fierce, hot anger, an anger that was entirely on my behalf. Don't let him, Nash said, his voice a low, gravelly promise. He doesn't get to win. I know, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. He got it. He saw the manipulation for exactly what it was. Which is why I'm giving these to you. I thrust the heavy vase into his surprised hands. I don't want them in my house. Give them to your mom. Use them for target practice. I don't care. Just get them away from me. He took the vase, his strong fingers wrapping around the crystal. For a long moment, he just looked at me, 1,000 unspoken things passing between us. He was seeing me, not as a damsel in distress, but as a fighter. And he was ready to stand in my corner. Okay, he finally said, his voice soft. It's just you and me tomorrow, Emmy. Picnic blankets and questionable potato salad. He doesn't exist. He doesn't exist, I repeated, the words feeling like a vow. I turned and walked back toward my house, not looking back. I could feel his eyes on me the whole way. The air felt lighter, my step surer. Paul had made his move, and I had just made mine. The board was set for tomorrow, and for the first time, I felt like I was actually playing the game, not just being played. The picnic wasn't just a date anymore. It was a statement, and I couldn't wait to make it. Chapter 4, Potato Salad and Power Plays Saturday morning dawned with an almost cinematic perfection that felt vaguely suspicious. The sun was a soft gold, the sky was a cloudless, impossible blue, and a gentle breeze whispered through the cottonwood trees, carrying the scent of my mom's prize-winning roses. It was the kind of day that love songs and beer commercials are made of. It was also the kind of day where you just knew something was bound to go spectacularly wrong. My anxiety, which had been blissfully dormant, decided to wake up and do calisthenics in my stomach. It's just a picnic, Brooks. You've had picnics before. You sit on a blanket, you eat food that has a 50-50 chance of giving you salmonella, you try not to get eaten alive by ants. Simple. But it wasn't simple. It wasn't just a picnic. It was a statement. It was a line drawn in the proverbial sand of Oak Creek Community Park. On one side, me, Nash, and a future that smelled like fresh air and sawdust. On the other, Paul, his sleek BMW, and a past that smelled of lilies and lies. This realization sent me into a full-blown wardrobe crisis. What does one wear to a symbolic declaration of romantic independence? My closet offered two distinct choices: slightly mud-stained farm girl, or awkward leftovers from my old life in Chicago. Neither felt right. The farm clothes felt too much like I was trying to play a part, and the city clothes felt like a betrayal. I held up a simple sundress, a floral print I'd bought for a gallery opening Paul had dragged me to. I could almost hear his voice, dripping with condescension. "It's sweet, darling." Very pastoral. I threw it on the bed in disgust. Then I held up my favorite pair of overalls. My own voice echoed in my head. "Okay, you look like you're about to ask if anyone has any gray poop on while driving a tractor. Tone it down, Farmer Jane." After 30 minutes of sartorial agony, I settled on a compromise. My most reliable pair of dark-washed jeans that fit well without being restrictive, a simple white t-shirt, and my trusty brown leather boots. It was me, uncomplicated, real. I twisted my ponytail into a loose braid, swiped on a little mascara, and declared myself ready for battle. Or, a date. At precisely 11:59 a.m., Nash's familiar Ford F-250 rumbled up the driveway. My heart did a little two-step against my ribs. He hopped out, looking so effortlessly handsome it was almost unfair. He'd traded his work jeans for a newer, darker pair, and a clean, navy blue plaid shirt was rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong, sun-kissed forearms. He'd left the baseball cap at home, and his brown hair was slightly tousled by the wind. He was holding a classic wicker picnic basket that looked like it had been in his family for generations. My dad, who had suddenly found a compelling reason to be on the porch tightening a loose railing, gave Nash a firm nod. "Colten." "Mr. Brooks," Nash replied with an easy smile. "Keeping that porch structurally sound, I see." "A man's work is never done," Dad said, his version of a blessing. I walked out, my hands shoved in my back pockets to keep them from trembling. Nash's smile widened when he saw me, and his eyes did a slow, appreciative sweep from my boots to my braid that made my skin tingle. "Hey, you," he said, his voice a low, warm rumble. "Hey, cowboy," I replied, trying to sound casual and not like I'd just spent half an hour debating the socio-political implications of denim. "Ready for some questionable potato salad?" "Born ready," he laughed. "After you." He opened the passenger door for me, a simple, gentlemanly gesture that felt monumental. Paul had never opened a car door for me. He'd just unlocked them remotely from a distance, as if touching the handle was beneath him. As I slid into the seat, my leg brushed against his hand, and that familiar jolt of electricity shot through me. The cab of his truck smelled like him, that clean, outdoorsy scent mixed with a faint hint of leather and coffee. It was the safest I had felt in a long, long time. The drive to the park was short, filled with the easy, comfortable silence of two people who had known each other their whole lives. Oak Creek's Founders Day picnic was in full swing. The community park was a sea of checkered blankets and colorful camp chairs. Kids shrieked with laughter as they ran through sprinklers. The local high school band was murdering a rendition of a top 40 hit near the gazebo, and the air was thick with the smell of grilled hot dogs and freshly cut grass. It was chaotic, wholesome, and a million miles away from the sterile, curated world Paul inhabited. "Looks like Mildred already staked out her usual spot," Nash observed, nodding towards a prime location under the largest oak tree. "Gives her a panoramic view of all the goings-on." "The woman is a strategic genius. Her intelligence network is terrifying," I agreed. We found a spot of our own, a little ways from the main crowd, but still with a good view of the three-legged race. Nash spread out a thick navy blue blanket, and as we settled down, my hip pressed against his. Neither of us moved away. "So," I said, peering into the basket as he opened it, "what culinary delights did you bring? Please tell me it's not just beef jerky and a can of beans?" He chuckled, pulling out containers. "Have a little faith, Brooks. My mom doesn't mess around when it comes to picnics." He was right. There were thick turkey and Swiss sandwiches on homemade bread, a container of crisp, cold pasta salad with feta and olives, a bag of crunchy dill pickles, and a Tupperware of his mom's famous chocolate chip cookies. It was perfect. We ate, we talked, we laughed. Nash told me about his plans to expand the ranch, to introduce a more sustainable grazing method he'd been researching. His eyes lit up when he talked about it, his passion for the land so palpable it was contagious. I found myself telling him about my degree in marketing, not as a tool to sell luxury condos like Paul wanted, but how I'd always dreamed of using it to help small, local businesses, farmers, markets, and places like Miller's Hardware. "You'd be amazing at that," he said, his expression serious. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I felt a blush creep up my neck. He saw me not as an accessory or a project, but as a person with dreams of her own. "Emmy, Nash, fancy seeing you two here?" We both looked up. Mildred Miller was making a beeline for our blanket, a plate of brownies in her hand and a gleam in her eye. "Mildred," Nash said, a polite, slightly wary smile on his face. "How are you?" "Oh, I'm just wonderful. It does an old woman's heart good to see you two finally. Catching up," she said, giving us both a very pointed wink. "I brought you some of my fudge brownies. A little something to sweeten the deal, you know." She placed the plate on our blanket and lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "So, are you back for good, Emmy? Putting down roots?" "Your mother has been hoping." "Just taking it one day at a time, Mildred," I said, forcing a smile. "Well, you couldn't pick a better root than this one," she said, patting Nash's shoulder. "Good, solid stock, these Coltens." Before either of us could formulate a response that didn't involve digging a hole and hiding in it, she was off, presumably to gather more intel from another unsuspecting couple. I looked at Nash, who was rubbing the back of his neck, a faint flush on his cheeks. "Solid stock, huh?" I teased. He groaned, hiding his face in his hands for a second. "She's been trying to set me up with her niece from Poughkeepsie for the last 6 months. I think you just saved me from a lifetime of awkward holiday newsletters." I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that came from my toes. The tension of the morning had completely melted away. This was easy. This was right. I leaned back on my elbows, tilting my face to the sun, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. For the first time, I could actually picture a future here. A life. And that's when I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the park, near the entrance, a stark figure in a world of plaid and denim. Paul. He was wearing tailored linen trousers, a crisp white button-down shirt, and sunglasses that probably cost more than Nash's entire truck. He was holding a bottle of champagne and 2 delicate flutes. He surveyed the scene with the detached air of an anthropologist studying a primitive tribe. My blood ran cold. The laughter died in my throat, and the sun suddenly felt harsh and unforgiving. "Emmy? What's wrong?" Nash's voice was soft, but I could feel his body tense beside me. He'd seen the shift in my expression and was already scanning the crowd, his protective instincts kicking in. His gaze followed mine, and he saw him. A muscle in his jaw jumped. "Don't let him," Nash said quietly, his voice a low, steady anchor in my sudden storm of panic. "We decided. He doesn't exist." "Right," I breathed, trying to force the air back into my lungs. "He doesn't exist. He's a very well-dressed, very punchable mirage." But the mirage started walking. He moved through the crowd with an unnatural grace, people unconsciously parting for him. He was heading directly for us. My first instinct was to run, to grab the blanket and flee into the woods. But I looked at Nash, at his solid, unwavering profile, and the memory of me marching across the field with that stupid vase of peonies flashed in my mind. I was done running. Paul stopped at the edge of our blanket, his shadow falling over me. He took off his sunglasses, and his dark eyes, so skilled at feigning emotion, were filled with a look of wounded sincerity. "Emily," he said, his voice just loud enough for us to hear over the band. "I was hoping I'd find you here." "I wanted to apologize again. In person," he gestured with the champagne. "I brought a peace offering. Veuve Clicquot. Our favorite. Your favorite, I thought. You know I think it tastes like sour yeast." "Hello, Paul," I said, my voice impressively steady. "As you can see, I'm busy." Paul's gaze flickered to Nash, a dismissive, almost pitiful look. "Of course. Catching up with old acquaintances." He then gave Nash a brilliant, false smile. "Paul Sanders. I believe we met on Emily's porch." Nash didn't smile back. He didn't offer a hand. He just looked at Paul with a flat, unreadable expression. "I remember. I'm sure this is all a bit awkward," Paul continued, his tone smooth as silk, "but Emmy and I have a lot of history. 4 years is a long time to just throw away over a little misunderstanding, isn't it, darling?" He was talking to Nash, but his eyes were locked on me, trying to pull me into our old toxic dynamic. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Paul. It was a termination of contract." "The terms were no longer acceptable," I said, refusing to look away. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face before he masked it with a pained sigh. Always so dramatic. He looked around at the chaos of the picnic, a faint sneer on his lips. "This is quite the event. So rustic. Do they have a contest for the largest gourd?" "It's a picnic," Nash said, his voice dangerously quiet. "For the town. For families." Right. "Families," Paul mused, as if the concept were foreign. "Well, I won't interrupt your picnic for long." I just wanted to ask you to dinner tonight, Emily. At the Creekside Inn. Their chef apparently trained in France. It won't be Le Bernardin, but it's a start. We need to talk properly, without interruptions. The insult to Nash was clear, wrapped in a veneer of civility. This was it, the moment of truth. The whole park didn't matter. The only people in the world were the three of us on this small, 4-by-6-foot patch of blue fabric. I took a breath. No, Paul. No? He sounded genuinely surprised. The thought that I would refuse him in front of the pet farmer was clearly incomprehensible. No, I repeated, and this time, my voice was stronger. I sat up straighter, drawing strength from Nash's solid presence beside me. I'm not having dinner with you tonight, or any other night. There is nothing left for us to talk about. I asked you to leave. You chose to stay. That's your decision. But my decision is to be here, with Nash. Now I'm asking you one last time, as politely as I can in a public park, to please leave us alone. The silence was electric. Paul's charming facade cracked, and for a split second, I saw the cold, reptilian fury beneath. His eyes narrowed, and his grip on the champagne bottle tightened. He looked from my defiant face to Nash's stony one. He was outnumbered. Beaten. He composed himself with a visible effort, plastering a sad, martyr-like smile back on his face. I see, he said softly. I understand. I'll give you your space. He took a step back, the perfect picture of a heartbroken man respecting his ex's wishes. But as he turned, he leaned down, pretending to adjust his trousers, and his mouth was suddenly right next to my ear. This little fantasy of yours is going to end, Emily, he whispered, his voice a venomous hiss that no one else could hear. And when it does, I'll be here to pick up the pieces. You and I are not over. Not until I say so. And then he was gone, striding away as gracefully as he'd arrived, leaving the scent of his expensive cologne and the chill of his threat hanging in the warm, sunny air. My body started to tremble. The adrenaline drained away, leaving me feeling hollow and shaky. The cheerful sounds of the picnic seemed to rush back in, loud and jarring. A warm, calloused hand covered mine. I looked down, then up at Nash. The anger in his eyes was a blazing fire, but his touch was incredibly gentle. Are you okay? He asked, his voice rough. I nodded, unable to speak. I felt violated, like Paul had managed to crawl inside my head despite my best efforts. The joy of the day had been tainted. He had won that at least. Don't you dare let him, Nash said, as if reading my mind. He squeezed my hand. Don't you let him take this from us. He started packing up the picnic basket with quick, efficient movements. Come on! Where are we going? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Somewhere he can't find us, he said, his jaw set. We're finishing this date. On our terms. He pulled me to my feet, his hand still holding mine. A warm, solid lifeline. He led me away from the noise and the crowd, away from the prying eyes and the ghosts of the past, his grip firm and protective. The picnic wasn't over. He was right. This was a battle, and we had just won a major victory. But as we walked toward his truck, Paul's whispered threat echoed in my ears. The war was far from over, and I had a terrifying feeling it was about to get a whole lot uglier. Chapter 5. A different kind of picnic. Nash's hand was a warm, calloused anchor in the sea of my anxiety. He didn't let go as we navigated the maze of picnic blankets and screeching children, his grip firm and steady, a silent declaration that I wasn't alone in this. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on us, including, I was sure, the all-seeing gaze of Mildred Miller from her strategic Oak Tree command post. I could practically hear the gears of the Oak Creek rumor mill grinding into overdrive. Emmy Brooks and Nash Colten fleeing the picnic hand in hand after a confrontation with a mysterious, well-dressed stranger. Details at 11. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Paul's whispered threat was a venomous serpent coiling in my gut. You and I are not over. Not until I say so. It wasn't a plea or an argument. It was a statement of ownership. The same ownership he'd asserted for 2 years, chipping away at my confidence until I felt less like a partner and more like a possession he kept on a beautifully decorated shelf. We reached his truck, and the familiar scent of leather and fresh air was a welcome relief from the cloying perfume of Paul's presence. Nash opened my door, his eyes meeting mine for a brief, intense moment. The anger was still there, a hot, protective fire banked just behind his calm expression. He helped me in, his hand brushing my arm, and the small, comforting touch was enough to make the trembling in my own hands subside. He got in the driver's side, the truck groaning in protest as his solid frame settled into the seat. He didn't start the engine right away. He just sat there, his hands resting on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked, his voice low and even. I shook my head, staring out at the chaotic, cheerful scene we were leaving behind. Not yet. I think if I try to use words right now, they'll just come out as one long, continuous scream. A small, sad smile touched his lips. Okay. No screaming. Where to? You're the one who said you had a plan, I reminded him, my voice sounding fragile to my own ears. You said we were going somewhere he couldn't find us. He seemed to like that. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. Right, my plan. He turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life, a comforting, powerful sound. Buckle up, Brooks. We're going off-road. He pulled out of the crowded parking lot and turned, not back towards our houses, but in the opposite direction, heading out of town where the paved roads gave way to gravel and then, eventually, to dirt. We drove past fields of corn standing tall and green in the afternoon sun, past grazing cattle that lifted their heads to watch us pass with lazy indifference. The farther we got from the park, the more the knot in my stomach began to loosen. Paul, with his tailored trousers and city sensibilities, wouldn't be caught dead out here. This was Nash's world, and for today, he was letting me share it. We turned onto a narrow, bumpy track that I recognized as the service road for the Colten ranch. It was a road I'd explored 1,000 times as a kid, usually on a rusty bicycle, with Nash riding patiently ahead, making sure I didn't wipe out in a pothole. The truck jostled and swayed as we climbed higher, leaving the flat farmland behind. Finally, he pulled to a stop at the crest of a long, gently sloping hill. We were at Colten Ridge. It was the highest point for miles, a place I hadn't been since I was a teenager. From here, you could see everything. The entire valley spread out below us like a patchwork quilt. The neat squares of farmland, the winding silver ribbon of Oak Creek, the cluster of buildings that made up the town. To the left was the sprawling Colten Ranch, with its massive barns and sprawling pastures, and right next to it, nestled in a grove of oak trees, was my own small hobby farm. Our properties lay side by side, two pieces of the same puzzle. Wow, I breathed, the view stealing the words right out of my mouth. I forgot how beautiful it is up here. Some things don't change, Nash said softly. He killed the engine, and the sudden silence was filled with the hum of insects and the whisper of the wind through the tall grass. Come on, let's finish that picnic. He grabbed the blanket and the basket, and I followed him to a spot under a lone, ancient cedar tree. The ground was soft with a carpet of dry needles, and the air smelled of sun-baked earth and pine. He spread the blanket, and we sat down, the awkwardness of the park melting away in the vast open space. For a while, we just ate his mom's chocolate chip cookies in silence, watching a hawk circle high above the valley. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It was a shared silence, a moment to breathe and regroup. He said he'd be waiting for me, I said finally, the words quiet but clear in the still air. When my fantasy is over, I picked at a loose thread on the blanket. That's his favorite move, making me feel like my own life, my own choices, are just some childish game that I'll get tired of, like he's the only real thing in the world. Nash stopped chewing his cookie. He put it down and turned to face me fully, his expression serious. What he whispered to you back at the park. I couldn't hear it, but I saw your face. What was it? I took a deep breath. He said, "We're not over until he says so." The muscle in Nash's jaw jumped again, a visible manifestation of his fury. He doesn't get to say so, Emmy. He doesn't get any say in your life at all. I know that, I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. I know that, in my head. But he spent 2 years making me believe the opposite. He's good at it. He was brilliant, charming. He'd pick apart my friendships until I felt like no one else really cared about me. He'd call my dreams cute and offer a more realistic path, which was always just a supporting role in his life. By the end, I felt so small and so alone. Coming home was the first thing I'd done just for me in years, and he sees it as a rebellion that he needs to crush. The story poured out of me, a condensed, painful summary of the slow erosion of my sense of self. Nash just listened, his hazel eyes never leaving my face. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice. He just gave me the space to finally say it all out loud to someone other than myself. When I finished, my voice thick with unshed tears, he reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from my cheek. His touch was featherlight, but it sent a shockwave of warmth through me. "I'm so sorry, Emmy," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm sorry he did that to you. And I'm sorry I wasn't there. It's not your fault," I sniffled, giving him a watery smile. "You had your own life, and I was supposed to be a grown-up." "Being a grown-up doesn't mean you have to fight all your battles alone," he said fiercely. "When you first came home a couple months ago, I saw you on the phone with him once, out by the barn. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I saw you. You looked just like you did at the park today, like a ghost. I wanted to come over and rip that phone out of your hand and tell him to go to hell. Why didn't you?" I asked, genuinely curious. He looked down at his hands, his big, capable hands that could fix a fence or soothe a spooked horse. "Because it wasn't my place. You had to be the one to hang up. And you did. You were the strongest person I knew when we were kids, and you're even stronger now. He just made you forget it for a while." His words were a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still so raw. He didn't see me as broken or weak. He saw me as strong. And hearing it from him, from the boy who'd always been my protector, made me believe it myself. Just then, a loud, inquisitive moo broke the emotional tension. We both jumped and looked over. A young black and white calf with enormous liquid brown eyes and comically large ears had wandered away from its mother and was now standing about 10 feet away, staring at our picnic basket with intense curiosity. My sob turned into a surprised laugh. "Well, hello there. Are you the welcoming committee?" I asked the calf. It took a hesitant step closer, its tail flicking. "That's Oreo," Nash said, a grin spreading across his face, chasing the last of the shadows away. "She's the nosiest thing on 4 legs. Probably smells the cookies." "Oreo, you have impeccable taste," I told her solemnly. "But these are our cookies. You can have a pickle." I held out one of the dill pickles from the container. Oreo sniffed the air, her wet black nose twitching, and took another cautious step. Then, with the lightning-fast reflexes of a hungry calf, she lunged forward, snatched the pickle from my fingers with her surprisingly rough tongue, and trotted away, crunching loudly. I stared at my pickleless, slobber-covered fingers and burst out laughing. It was a real, deep, cleansing laugh. Nash joined in, his rich baritone echoing across the ridge. The absurdity of the moment, the emotional confession, the whispered threats, and now a pickle-thieving calf was just too much. "Okay," I said, wiping a tear of laughter from my eye. "New farm rule. We must protect the snacks from the pickle bandits." "I'll get right on building a pickle-proof fence," he promised, his eyes twinkling. He was still smiling, looking at me with an expression of such open affection that it made my breath catch. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the western sky in strokes of orange and pink. The light softened, bathing the valley in a warm, golden glow. The world felt quiet and peaceful again, just the two of us on our hilltop sanctuary. Nash reached over and took my hand, his thumb stroking softly across my knuckles. The laughter faded, replaced by something deeper, more intense. "He doesn't get to win, Emmy," he said, his voice a low, serious rumble. "He doesn't get to spoil this. He doesn't get to have any part of you, ever again. You're home now. You're safe. I'm not going to let him hurt you." It wasn't just a comforting phrase. It was a vow. It was the promise of a port in a storm, a shield against the ghosts of my past. It was everything I hadn't known I needed to hear. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. But I didn't want to. I wanted this more than I had wanted anything in a very long time. I leaned in to meet him, my eyes fluttering shut. His lips met mine, and it was nothing like the frantic, interrupted moment in the mud. This was gentle, it was sure. It was a question and an answer all at once. His lips were soft, warm, and tasted faintly of chocolate chip cookies and sunshine. One of his hands came up to cup my jaw, his calloused thumb stroking my cheek, and I melted into his touch, my free hand coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady, solid beat of his heart beneath my palm. The kiss deepened, becoming more confident, more searching. It was a kiss that held years of shared history and the promise of a new beginning. It was a kiss that said, "I see you. I'm here. You're not alone." It was, without a doubt, the most real, most perfect kiss of my entire life. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his warm breath mingling with mine. The setting sun cast a golden halo around his head, and his hazel eyes were dark with emotion. "Wow," I whispered, because my brain had apparently forgotten how to form any other words. "Yeah," he breathed, a slow smile spreading across his lips. Wow, we stayed like that for a long time, just watching the last sliver of sun dip below the horizon, leaving the sky bruised with purple and indigo. He packed up the remnants of our picnic, his movements easy and unhurried. The drive back down the ridge was quiet, but this time it was a comfortable, contented silence. He kept one hand on the wheel, the other holding mine on the seat between us. When he pulled into my driveway, he walked me to the front door. The porch light cast a warm, welcoming glow, and the crickets were starting their nightly symphony. It felt like the end of a perfect date. A perfect, albeit slightly dramatic, date. "Thank you, Nash," I said, turning to face him on the top step. "For everything. For salvaging the day. Anytime," he said, his voice low. He lifted my hand, the one he was still holding, and pressed a soft kiss to my knuckles. "I'll call you tomorrow?" "I'd like that," I said, my heart doing a happy little flutter. He lingered for a moment, his gaze warm and intense, before giving my hand a final squeeze and heading back to his truck. I watched until his taillights disappeared down the road, a goofy, ridiculously happy smile plastered on my face. I practically floated inside, locking the door behind me. My parents had already gone to bed. The house was quiet and still. I felt safe. I felt hopeful. I felt happy. Genuinely happy. I padded into my room, still smiling, and kicked off my boots. My phone was on my nightstand, where I'd left it. The screen was dark. As I reached for my charger, the screen lit up. One new notification. My heart stuttered. It was a text message from a number I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I unlocked the phone and opened it. There were no words. Just a picture. It was a photo of a single, perfect peony resting on the outside sill of my bedroom window. The photo was taken from the darkness of my yard, looking up. He had been here. While I was on the ridge with Nash, feeling safe and protected, he had been right here, just outside my window. Watching. Waiting. Leaving his mark. The happy, hopeful bubble inside me didn't just pop. It shattered into a million icy shards. The war wasn't over. It had just been brought right to my door. Chapter 6. Silence and Squeals. The goofy, blissed-out smile on my face didn't just fade. It was sandblasted off by the ice-cold dread that flooded my veins. My phone felt like a block of frozen lead in my hand. The screen glowed with a malevolent light, illuminating a single, perfect peony resting on the weathered wood of my windowsill. The photo was sharp, professional-looking, taken from the darkness of my yard. A predator's eye view. He was here. Right here. While you were kissing Nash on that hill, feeling safe, he was in your yard. Looking at your window. At your room. My blood roared in my ears. I scrambled to the window, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I shoved the curtain aside and peered out into the inky blackness. Nothing. The sill was empty. The yard was quiet, bathed in the pale, indifferent light of the moon. There was no sign that anyone had been there. No footprints, no looming shadow, just the familiar silhouette of the oak trees and the distant glint of the moon on the Coltens' metal barn roof. For a wild, hopeful second, I wondered if I'd imagined it. A stress-induced hallucination. But the picture was still on my phone, a digital ghost proving my sanity and my terror. He hadn't left the flower. He'd just taken a picture of it there. A proof of concept for his omnipresence. A calling card to let me know that no lock, no wall, no cowboy next door could keep him out. He could get this close whenever he wanted. My first instinct was to call Nash. To sob into the phone and tell him that the monster wasn't just at the gates. He was peering through the windows. But I stopped, my thumb hovering over his contact. What would that accomplish? It would shatter the perfect, fragile beauty of what had just happened between us. Our first kiss. The promise of something new and real. I couldn't let Paul taint that memory. Couldn't let his poison seep into the one good thing I had. It would be like handing him a victory. No, you are not the damsel in distress, I told myself, my voice a harsh whisper in the silent room. You are Emmy Brooks. You wrangle pigs. You set fence posts. You handled him at the picnic. You can handle this. With a trembling finger, I deleted the message. I deleted the photo. I blocked the unknown number. It felt like a pathetically small act of defiance, like trying to stop a tidal wave with a bucket, but it was all I had. I dragged my heavy oak dresser in front of my bedroom door, the legs scraping a protest against the wood floor. It wouldn't stop him if he really wanted to get in, but it would make a hell of a noise. It was a flimsy shield, but it was mine. Sleep, when it finally came, was a fitful, shallow thing, haunted by shadows and the phantom scent of peonies. The next few days, I performed the most impressive acting job of my life. I operated on a split level of consciousness. On the surface, I was floating. The memory of that kiss on the ridge was a constant, warm hum beneath my skin. The terror of the photograph was a cold, hard stone I swallowed down deep inside me. I chose the warmth. I had to. Nash called the next morning, just as he'd promised. "Just wanted to make sure you weren't stolen by pickle bandits in the night," he'd said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sent a shiver down my spine. "Nope. All pickles are present and accounted for," I'd replied, laughing as I sat on the porch swing, watching the sun burn the morning mist off the fields. Though Hamlet was giving the pickle jar a suspicious look this morning. We talked for almost an hour, about nothing and everything. It was as easy and natural as breathing. I didn't tell him about the picture. I convinced myself it was a final, desperate act. A parting shot from a sore loser. He had to be gone by now. He had a life in Chicago, a company to run, a fragile ego that couldn't possibly stand this town for more than a few days. The peony was his last word. I wouldn't let it be the first word in whatever was starting between Nash and me, and something was definitely starting. The week that followed was a series of small, perfect moments that I collected like precious stones. There was the afternoon he showed up at the fence line with 2 bottles of ice-cold root beer because he saw I was sweating while weeding my mom's garden. We stood on opposite sides of the wire fence drinking from the bottles, our fingers brushing when he passed one to me. There was the evening he texted me a picture of his mare with her brand-new wobbly-legged foal, and we spent the next hour texting back and forth, brainstorming ridiculous names. I was campaigning hard for Sir Reginald Trottersworth III. He was leaning towards mud pie. I was giddy. There's no other word for it. After 2 years of walking on eggshells with Paul, of analyzing every word and gesture, being with Nash felt like taking my shoes off and running barefoot through the grass. I was on cloud 9, and from way up here the stone of fear in my gut felt very small and very far away. It happens on a Thursday. My parents had left early that morning for an overnight trip to a statewide history teachers' convention my dad was presenting at. "Try not to burn the place down," he'd said, giving me a hug. "And make sure Hamlet doesn't figure out how to use the remote. I don't want to come home and find he's ordered a dozen pay-per-view wrestling matches." The farm was quiet. Too quiet. By late afternoon, I'd finished all my chores and was restless. I headed out to the barn, deciding to do a thorough mucking out of the stalls, a mindless, physical task to keep my hands and my brain busy. I put on my headphones, blasting a classic rock playlist, and got to work, singing off-key to the sound of my own shovel scraping against concrete. Hamlet was in his pen at the far end of the barn, snuffling happily through a pile of fresh hay I'd given him. The big barn doors were wide open, letting the warm, golden light of the late afternoon stream in, illuminating dancing dust motes. It was peaceful. It was normal. I was so lost in my work, in the music, in the simple rhythm of the chore, that I didn't hear the car. I didn't hear the footsteps. I only knew I wasn't alone when a shadow fell over me, eclipsing the sunlight from the doorway. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. My headphones slipped from my ears, the music suddenly tinny and distant. Paul was standing there. He wasn't wearing a suit or linen trousers. He was dressed in dark jeans and a plain black t-shirt that stretched taut across his chest. He looked bigger, somehow, more solid, less like a slick city broker, and more like a predator who had shed his camouflage. The charming, manipulative mask was gone. His face was a thundercloud, his dark eyes flat and cold. "The game is over, Emily," he said. His voice wasn't smooth or charming. It was low and guttural, the sound of a lock clicking into place. "You've had your little vacation. It's time to come home." I tightened my grip on the shovel, holding it like a weapon. My mind raced, trying to catch up with the sudden, terrifying reality. He hadn't left. He'd been waiting. He knew my parents were gone. He knew I was alone. "I am home, Paul," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. "I told you. We're done. You need to get off my property right now." He took a step into the barn, and the shadows seemed to deepen around him. "No, I don't think so. I've been patient. I've played the penitent boyfriend. I sent you flowers. I gave you space. I let you have your little tantrum with the farm boy. But my patience has run out." He took another step, and I instinctively took one back. "I'm not going anywhere with you." "That's not a choice you get to make anymore," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I made you, Emily. Everything you were in Chicago, I gave to you. You think you can just throw that away and come play milkmaid in this pathetic mudhole? You belong to me. The possessiveness in his voice, the sheer, arrogant conviction, sent a jolt of pure rage through my fear. I don't belong to anyone, I shouted, raising the shovel. Get out, or, I swear to God, Paul, I will call the sheriff. He laughed. It was a cold, ugly sound that didn't reach his eyes. Your phone is in the house. Your nearest neighbor is a quarter-mile away. No one can hear you. And then he moved. He was shockingly fast. He closed the distance between us in 2 long strides. I swung the shovel, a clumsy, desperate arc, but he caught the wooden handle easily, yanking it from my grasp and tossing it aside. It clattered against the far wall of the barn. He grabbed my arms, his fingers biting into my flesh like steel bands. The physical reality of him, his strength, was terrifying. I was a tomboy, strong for my size, but my small, petite frame was nothing against his. He was bigger, taller, his body hardened by years in a gym with a personal trainer. I was a rag doll in his grip. You're gonna get in the car, he gritted out, his face inches from mine. I could smell the faint, bitter scent of coffee on his breath. You're gonna come back to Chicago with me. And you are going to learn some respect. No, I screamed, struggling against him, kicking at his shins. Let go of me! My struggles only seemed to fuel his rage. His grip tightened, and he shook me, my head snapping back. Stop it! He roared, his voice echoing in the cavernous barn. That's when Hamlet started squealing. It wasn't his usual happy grunt or his impatient squeal for food. This was a frantic, high-pitched sound of pure distress. He slammed his stout body against the wooden planks of his pen. Again and again, the wood groaning in protest. He could sense it. He knew I was in trouble. My tiny, pink Houdini, my renegade pig, was trying to save me. The sound seemed to unnerve Paul for a second. His eyes darted toward the pen, his expression a mixture of annoyance and disbelief. What is wrong with that disgusting animal? That momentary distraction was all I needed. I brought my knee up hard, connecting with his thigh. It wasn't the groin shot I was aiming for, but it was enough to make him grunt in pain and loosen his grip. I wrenched one arm free and clawed at his face, my nails finding purchase on his cheek. He bellowed in rage and pain, shoving me away. I stumbled backward, tripping over a loose bucket, and went down hard on the concrete floor. The impact knocked the wind out of me. Before I could scramble away, he was on me, one hand tangling in my hair, yanking my head back, the other pinning my shoulder to the ground. Pain exploded at the base of my skull. You stupid little bitch, he snarled, his face contorted with a fury I had never seen before. You're gonna regret that. Hamlet's squeals grew more frantic, more desperate. He was throwing his full weight against the gate now, the hinges straining. Crack! A piece of wood splintered, but the gate held. All he could do was scream for me. Paul hauled me to my feet, my hair still tangled in his fist. He was done talking. He started dragging me, half carrying me, out of the barn and into the blinding afternoon sun. I fought. I screamed. I kicked. But it was useless. My boots scraped against the dirt, my heels digging in, trying to find purchase, but he was too strong. He was a machine, pulling me relentlessly toward the sleek, black BMW parked near the side of the house, so out of place, so alien. The back door was already open, waiting for me. The gravel of the driveway bit into my bare arms where my sleeve had ridden up as he dragged me. My own throat was raw from screaming, my voice mixing with the frantic, terrified squeals of my pig. The sounds were swallowed by the vast, empty silence of the farm. He was right. No one could hear me. No one was coming. Chapter 7: A Cacophony of Consequences. My world had shrunk to a horrifyingly small collection of sensory details. The sharp, angry bite of gravel digging into the skin of my arms. The raw, useless burn in my throat from screams that were being swallowed by the wide-open Indiana sky. The iron-hard grip of Paul's fingers tangled in my hair, yanking, controlling, a physical manifestation of his will. And above it all, a counter-melody to my own terror, was the incessant, high-pitched shriek of a very distressed pig. Fight, Brooks, fight! The voice in my head was a drill sergeant's bark. He is not putting you in that car. Over my dead, mud-caked body, I bucked and twisted, a wild animal in a trap. My boots found no purchase in the loose gravel. My flailing limbs had no effect against his solid, immovable mass. He was a machine fueled by a cold, possessive rage, and he was dragging me inexorably toward the open maw of his BMW. The sleek black car, once a symbol of his success, now looked like a hearse. "My hearse! I've invested too much in you to let you go, Emily!" Paul grunted, his voice strained with the effort of dragging me. The words were so utterly, terrifyingly him. I wasn't a person. I was a stock portfolio that was underperforming. Hamlet's squeals from the barn intensified, rising in pitch until they were a single, unbroken shriek of porcine panic. It was a sound that didn't belong in the peaceful afternoon. It was the sound of something being torn apart. Crack SHP linter. A new sound joined the cacophony, a sound of tortured wood finally giving up the ghost. Paul half turned at the noise, his grip on my hair loosening by a fraction of an inch. That was all I needed. With a surge of pure, adrenaline-fueled fury, I stomped down hard on the arch of his expensive leather loafer. He roared in pain and surprise, and his grip faltered again. I twisted, sinking my teeth into the fleshy part of his forearm. He screamed, a sound of outrage more than pain, and flung me away from him. I hit the ground hard, my hip and shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. The world spun. Before I could even think about scrambling away, a pink and black cannonball shot out of the barn. It was Hamlet. He had done it. My little pink Houdini had busted through his gate. He wasn't trotting or running. He was in a full-blown, ears pinned back, tail in a knot panic gallop. His little legs pumped like pistons, his beady eyes were wide with terror, and he was still squealing, a mobile alarm system of profound indignation. He wasn't charging at Paul to save me. He was just running, blind with fear, away from the terrifying noises. His trajectory, however, was a thing of chaotic beauty. Paul, still clutching his bitten arm and cursing my name, took one step toward me. Hamlet, in his frantic escape, collided squarely with Paul's shins. It wasn't a tackle. It wasn't a heroic takedown. It was 150 pounds of panicked pig meeting the ankles of a man completely unprepared for 150 pounds of panicked pig. The result was spectacular. Paul's arms windmilled wildly, a look of comical disbelief on his face, before he went down like a felled tree, landing with a loud, satisfying whump in the middle of a patch of particularly damp dirt near the water trough. Hamlet, having fulfilled his chaotic purpose, didn't stop. He veered sharply, shot across the yard, and disappeared into my mom's prized vegetable garden, the scene of his previous crime, squealing all the way. For a single glorious second there was silence, broken only by the distant, receding shrieks of the pig. I pushed myself up on my elbows, a wild, hysterical laugh bubbling in my chest. Paul was sputtering, covered in mud, looking utterly bewildered. The moment was shattered by the screech of tires. Nash's Ford F-250 came tearing up the driveway, spitting gravel, and skidded to a halt not 20 feet away, positioning the truck between me and the road, a big, metal guard dog. The driver's side door flew open before the engine was even off, and Nash vaulted out. He wasn't the easygoing, smiling cowboy I'd spent the last week falling for. This was a different man entirely. His face was a mask of cold, hard fury. His jaw was set so tight I could see the muscles flexing from across the yard. His eyes, usually warm hazel, were dark, flinty chips of granite. He moved with a coiled, dangerous grace that I had never seen before, every line of his body screaming lethal intent. He took in the scene in a single, sweeping glance. Me on the ground, disheveled and scraped, Paul, muddy and furious, pushing himself to his feet, the open door of the BMW like a waiting cage. "Get away from her," Nash said. His voice was unnervingly quiet, a low, deadly rumble that vibrated in the air. It was more terrifying than any shout. Paul wiped a smear of mud from his face, his own features contorted with rage. His designer clothes were ruined, his dignity was in tatters, and he had just been taken down by a pig. He was a cornered animal. "Stay out of this, farm boy," Paul spat, his voice dripping with venom. "This is a private matter. My girlfriend and I were just leaving." "She's not your girlfriend," Nash said, taking a slow, deliberate step forward, "and she's not going anywhere." "I'm warning you," Paul snarled, balling his fists. He was bigger than Nash, taller by a few inches, broader in a tailored gym-sculpted way. He clearly thought this was a fight he could win. He launched himself forward, aiming a clumsy, telegraphed punch at Nash's head. It was the biggest mistake of his life. Nash didn't even seem to flinch. He moved with a speed and efficiency that was breathtaking. He sidestepped the punch, his body flowing with an economy of motion born from a lifetime of hard, physical work. He grabbed the front of Paul's shirt, using Paul's own momentum against him, and spun him around, slamming him face first into the dusty side of his own ridiculous BMW. The thud of Paul's body hitting the metal was sickeningly loud. Nash twisted Paul's arm behind his back in a move that was clearly painful and efficient. Paul cried out, a sharp, pathetic sound. Nash leaned in close, his mouth near Paul's ear, his voice still that same terrifyingly low rumble. "You ever come near her again?" Nash bit out, the words sharp and cold as ice shards. "You ever touch her? You ever even think her name again? And what happens next will make this feel like a friendly hug. Do you understand me?" He punctuated the last sentence by shoving Paul's face harder against the car. Paul made a choked, gurgling sound of assent. "I didn't hear you," Nash said, his voice dropping even lower. Yes, I understand," Paul gasped. Nash held him there for a second longer, a silent, final warning, before he shoved him away. Paul stumbled, catching himself on the open car door. He scrambled into the driver's seat, his face a mask of humiliation and fury. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Nash. He slammed the door, revved the engine with a furious roar, and peeled out of the driveway, leaving a cloud of dust and the lingering stench of fear in his wake. The silence that descended was absolute. The only sounds were the ragged gasps of my own breathing and the distant, happy grunts of Hamlet, who was now, I could see, enthusiastically devouring my mom's prize-winning zucchini. And then, the adrenaline fled my body and the world came crashing down. A wave of violent trembling racked my frame. My scraped arms began to sting, the knot of pain at the base of my skull throbbed, and the full, terrifying reality of what had just happened, of what could have happened, hit me with the force of a physical blow. A choked sob escaped my lips. Nash was at my side in an instant. The terrifying, cold-eyed stranger was gone, replaced by the gentle, worried man I knew. He knelt in the dirt in front of me, his big hands hovering over my shoulders, as if he was afraid to touch me, afraid he might break me. "Emmy," he said, his voice thick with concern. "Are you hurt? Did he hurt you?" I couldn't answer. I just shook my head, but the movement sent a fresh wave of sobs through me. They were ugly, gasping things, the culmination of 2 years of fear and a week of determined denial. The dam had broken. "Okay," he whispered, his voice infinitely gentle. "Okay, Emmy, you're safe now. I've got you. You're safe." He finally seemed to decide it was okay to touch me, and he gathered me into his arms, pulling me against his solid, warm chest. I collapsed against him, burying my face in his shirt, my hands clutching the fabric as if it were a lifeline. He just held me, one hand stroking my hair, the other wrapped securely around my back, holding me together while I fell apart. He smelled of sawdust and sunshine and safety, and I breathed him in, letting his strength seep into my bones. We stayed like that for a long time, kneeling in the dirt of my driveway, while I cried out all the fear and all the anger. He didn't say anything else, just held me, a silent, immovable mountain in the wreckage of my afternoon. When the sobs finally subsided into shuddering breaths, I pulled back, wiping my face with the back of my muddy hands. "I'm okay," I mumbled, though my voice was raw and shaky. "Really, just a little scraped up." His eyes, dark with 1,000 emotions, roamed my face, cataloging the tear tracks, the smudge of dirt on my cheek, the wildness in my hair. His gaze was so full of fierce, protective tenderness that it made my heart ache. "He was here before," I whispered, the confession tumbling out now that the walls were down. "The night of the picnic, he sent me a picture of a flower on my windowsill. He was in the yard. I didn't tell you. I'm so sorry, Nash. I didn't want him to ruin this. Us. I thought if I ignored him, he'd go away." A muscle in his jaw twitched, the only sign of the anger that was surely simmering just beneath the surface. But when he spoke, his voice was soft. "Don't you ever be sorry for that, Emmy. This isn't your fault. None of it. It's his." He reached out and gently brushed a thumb across my cheek, wiping away a stray tear. "But you're not ignoring him anymore. We're not. This ends now. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his movements calm and deliberate. "What's the sheriff's name again?" "The new one?" "Hutchins," I supplied, my voice barely audible. "Sheriff Hutchins?" Nash nodded, his thumb already tapping the screen. "Good. I'm calling him. You're going to press charges." It wasn't a question or a suggestion. It was a statement of fact, a line in the sand. As he held the phone to his ear, his gaze never left mine. He was my protector, my friend, my... something more. He was the man who faced down the monster for me. And as I looked at him, at his strong, determined face, I knew two things with absolute certainty. First, I was falling, completely and irrevocably, in love with Nash Colten. And second, Paul had made a terrible, terrible mistake. He had tried to crush my little fantasy. But in doing so, he had just made it undeniably, powerfully real. He hadn't just picked a fight with me, he had picked a fight with us. And the war was far from over. Chapter 8. The Zucchini Defense. My world was a 4-foot radius of dirt, held together by the steady warmth of Nash Colten's chest. His phone was pressed to his ear, but his eyes were locked on mine, a silent, blazing promise of no more. I could hear a calm female voice on the other end of the line, the town dispatcher. Nash's voice, when he spoke, was the polar opposite of the deadly rumble he'd used on Paul. It was calm, precise, and devoid of emotion, like a pilot reading a checklist in a storm. "Yes, this is Nash Colten. I'm at the Brooks, residence on County Line Road. I need Sheriff Hutchins out here. There's been an assault. Assault." The word hung in the air, heavy and ugly. It was a clinical, official term for the terror that had just unfolded. For the feeling of Paul's hands in my hair. For the raw helplessness of being dragged toward that car. The reality of it crashed over me again, and a fresh wave of tremors racked my body. Nash's arm tightened around me, a solid, living anchor. "She's safe now," he continued into the phone. "The perpetrator has left the property. Name is Paul Sanders, driving a black BMW Illinois plates. Yes, I'll be here when the sheriff arrives." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, his focus returning entirely to me. "Hutchins is on his way." "Okay," I whispered, the word barely a puff of air. "Okay, Brooks, you can do this. You just survived a pig-assisted takedown. You can talk to a cop." Nash's lips twitched, the first hint of a smile I'd seen since he'd vaulted from his truck. "A pig-assisted takedown?" "Hamlet was my first responder," I said, my voice watery but determined. He responded with chaotic screaming and a full-body check to the shins. It was surprisingly effective. My gaze drifted toward the garden, where the hero of the hour was now systematically murdering my mother's summer squash. He had a huge chunk of zucchini in his mouth, his little tail wagging in pure, unadulterated bliss. The sheer, blissful ignorance of his vandalism in the face of my trauma was so absurd, so perfectly Hamlet, that a wet, hiccuping laugh escaped me. "He's eating the evidence," I choked out, a fresh tear tracing a path through the dirt on my cheek. "I think he's eating your mom's grand prize entry for the county fair," Nash said, his voice soft. He gently pushed a stray strand of hair, matted with dirt and sweat, from my forehead. "Come on, let's get you up. Can you stand?" I nodded, and with his help, I managed to get to my feet. My legs felt like overcooked noodles. My whole body ached with a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Nash kept a steadying arm around my waist, his body a solid wall I could lean against. I looked down at myself. My jeans were torn at the knee, my favorite t-shirt was smeared with mud, and my arms were a mess of angry red scrapes from the gravel. I looked like I'd gone 10 rounds with a badger. A very well-dressed, sociopathic badger. We were still standing there, me leaning on him, Hamlet committing acts of vegetable terrorism in the background, when the low groan of another engine sounded on the driveway. A familiar black and white SUV with the Oak Creek County seal on the side rolled to a stop behind Nash's truck. Sheriff Hutchins was a tall, lanky man in his late 50s, with a face as weathered as a barn door and kind, tired eyes. He'd taken over after old Sheriff Brody retired 2 years ago. He moved with the unhurried calm of a man who had seen everything a small town could throw at him, from cow-tipping teenagers to bitter disputes over property lines. An assault by a jilted ex from the big city, however, probably wasn't on his usual Tuesday bingo card. He got out of his car, his gaze taking in the scene with a practiced, sweeping glance. He saw the abandoned BMW tracks, me looking like a wreck, Nash looking like a thundercloud, and a pig standing triumphantly over the corpse of a very large zucchini. He paused, one hand on his hip. Colten. Brooks, he said, his voice a calm baritone. He nodded toward the garden. Am I interrupting a barbecue? Something like that, Hutch, Nash said, his voice tight. The sheriff's easygoing demeanor evaporated as he got closer, his eyes zeroing in on my scraped arms and the wild, shell-shocked look in my eyes. Emily, are you all right? I'm okay, I said, the automatic response of a woman who has been taught to minimize her own pain. No, she's not, Nash countered immediately, his arm tightening around me protectively. Her ex-boyfriend, Paul Sanders, was here. He attacked her. He was trying to force her into his car. Hutchins, face hardened. He looked from me to Nash, then back to me. Okay, son, he said to Nash, his voice firm but gentle. Why don't you go secure our primary witness over there in the garden before he destroys all the zucchini? Give me a minute alone with Emily. Nash looked like he'd rather wrestle a grizzly bear than leave my side, but he understood. He gave my shoulder a final, reassuring squeeze, his eyes boring into mine. I'll be right here, he promised. I watched him stride over to the garden, his long-legged gait eating up the ground. Hamlet saw him coming and let out a squeal of protest, grabbing one last giant bite of squash before trotting away as Nash approached. There was a brief, comical chase around a tomato cage before Nash managed to scoop the muddy, squirming pig into his arms. Even in the middle of this nightmare, the sight of the big, strong cowboy holding my renegade pig was enough to make a tiny, hysterical part of my brain swoon. Emily, Sheriff Hutchins said, his voice pulling me back. Why don't we sit down over here on the porch steps? I need you to tell me exactly what happened. From the beginning. And so I did. Leaning against the porch railing where Paul had first stood, I told him everything. I told him about the breakup, about him showing up uninvited, about the picnic, and his whispered threat. I told him about the peonies, and the horrifying photograph on my windowsill. You deleted the picture and blocked the number? He asked, scribbling in a small notebook. Yes, I said, feeling a fresh wave of foolishness. I thought it was his last attempt to scare me. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. I thought he was gone. Girls like you always think that, he said, not unkindly. You're strong, so you think you can handle it. You think if you don't make a fuss, the monster will get bored and go away. But cornered rats don't get bored, Emily. They just get meaner. He sighed, scrubbing a hand over his face. And now it's your word against his about that photo. It would have helped. My heart sank. Of course, I'd erased the only piece of concrete evidence I had. Then I told him about today. About Paul waiting until my parents were gone. About the confrontation in the barn, his chilling words. You belong to me. I recounted the struggle, the fear, and the final, frantic drag across the driveway. My voice broke a few times, but I forced my way through it, Sheriff Hutchins listening patiently, his pen scratching against the paper. And the pig? He asked, a faint, disbelieving quirk to his lips. The pig, I confirmed, tripped him. Hutchins looked over at the barn, where Nash was now trying to repair the broken gate, Hamlet occasionally nudging his hand with a zucchini-scented snout. The sheriff shook his head slowly. Well, I'll be damned. 30 years in law enforcement, and that's a new one. Assault with a deadly pig. He closed his notebook. All right, Emily. I'm going to put out an alert for his vehicle. We'll check the Creekside Inn, see if he's still there, but I doubt it. A man like that, after a humiliation like this, he's running. He'll either head back to Chicago to lick his wounds, or he'll lay low somewhere nearby to plan his next move. The thought of him lurking somewhere in the quiet cornfields around Oak Creek sent a fresh chill down my spine. What happens now? I asked, my voice small. Now we get a temporary restraining order put in place first thing in the morning. I'll need you to come down to the station and give a formal, signed statement. With Nash as a witness to the final moments and your visible injuries, we have enough to charge him with assault and attempted kidnapping. The hard part, he admitted, his eyes full of a weary honesty, will be finding him to serve those papers. Guys like him have money. They have lawyers. They know how to disappear. But he made a mistake today, he got violent, and he got sloppy. And he did it in my town. We'll find him. Just then, the familiar sound of my mom's SUV came rumbling down the drive. My parents. They were home early. Oh, this is just perfect, I thought, my stomach clenching. Mom's about to see her prize-winning zucchini massacred, her daughter looking like she'd been in a fistfight, and a police car in her driveway. This day just keeps getting better. The car hadn't even come to a full stop before my mom was out, her face a mask of confusion that quickly morphed into panic. My dad got out on the other side, his expression grim. "Emmy? What on earth is going on? Sheriff? Is everyone all right?" Mom's voice was high with anxiety. And then she saw the garden. "My zucchini!" she shrieked, her hands flying to her mouth in horror. For a moment, I honestly thought the vegetable carnage was going to be the main focus of her distress. But then her eyes landed on me. On my torn jeans and scraped arms. Her focus shifted, her priorities snapping into their rightful maternal order. "Emily Ann Brooks! What happened to you?" My dad didn't say a word. He just walked over to me, his calm history teacher demeanor gone, replaced by a cold, quiet fury that was far more terrifying than my mother's panic. He looked at my face, at my arms, and then his gaze went to Nash, who was walking over from the barn, his face set in grim lines. "It was Paul," I said, my voice barely a whisper. My dad's jaw tightened so hard, I was surprised his teeth didn't crack. He put a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt more like he was steadying himself. What followed was a chaotic blur. Sheriff Hutchins calmly explained the situation to my parents, whose reactions were a study in contrasts. My mom buzzed around me, a frantic hen, trying to herd me inside to administer first aid, tea, and a lifetime supply of pot roast. My dad stood still as a statue, his face carved from stone, his gaze fixed on the spot where Paul's car had been, as if he could incinerate the man with the sheer force of his will. Nash was the calm center of the storm. He spoke with my dad in low tones, his presence a reassuring, solid force. He helped me explain to my mom that Hamlet's breakout was an act of heroism, not vandalism, which only partially mollified her about the loss of her zucchini. Finally, Sheriff Hutchins left, promising to call the second he had any news. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, ominous shadows across the yard. The crime scene was now just my home again, but it felt tainted, the memory of Paul's violence clinging to the air like a foul smell. Inside, my mom bustled around the kitchen, her anxiety manifesting as aggressive hospitality. "Nash, you're staying for dinner. It's not a request. I'm making spaghetti. Everyone needs carbs after a trauma." My dad, after a long, silent moment staring out the kitchen window, finally spoke. "I'm going to go call my brother," he said, his voice flat. My Uncle Steve was a corporate lawyer in Indianapolis. It was my dad's version of declaring war. I escaped to the bathroom, peeling off my ruined clothes and stepping into the shower. The hot water stung my scrapes, but it felt cleansing, washing away the dirt and the sweat and the lingering phantom feeling of Paul's hands on me. When I got out, I put on the softest, most comfortable sweatpants and t-shirt I owned. My armor for the evening. When I came back downstairs, Nash was at the kitchen sink, a washcloth in his hand. My parents were in the other room, their voices a low, worried murmur. "Here," he said softly, nodding to a kitchen chair. "Let me see those arms." I sat, and he knelt in front of me. He gently took my arm, his touch infinitely careful, and began to clean the gravel from the scrapes with antiseptic and a cool cloth. His hands, which I'd seen drive a fence post, wrestle a pig, and slam a man against a car, were now so incredibly gentle I could barely feel them. We were quiet for a long time, the only sound, the gentle dab of the cloth against my skin, and the ticking of the clock on the wall. "I'm sorry," I whispered, looking down at his bent head, at the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. He looked up, his hazel eyes meeting mine. "For what?" "You have nothing to be sorry for, Emmy. I'm sorry for bringing this chaos to your doorstep. Our first date ends with a public confrontation. And now this. You signed up for a picnic, not a season of a crime drama." A real, genuine smile finally broke through his worried expression. It was like the sun coming out. "Emmy," he said, his voice a low, warm rumble. "I've been waiting for a chance to take you on a date since you were 16. And I was a dumb college kid who didn't know what to do about the fact that he was half in love with the scrawny tomboy next door. A sociopathic ex and a rogue pig aren't going to scare me off. Nothing is." The confession hung in the air between us, simple, honest, and breathtaking. Half in love with the scrawny tomboy next door. My heart, which I thought had been shattered into a million pieces, seemed to swell in my chest, warm and whole. He finished cleaning the last scrape and put a bandage on it, his fingers lingering on my skin. He didn't move away. He stayed there, kneeling in front of me, his gaze holding mine. The world outside this small, quiet moment, the police, my parents, Paul, it all faded away. There was only the space between us, filled with unspoken things that were finally being said. "You know," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "that scrawny tomboy has been half in love with you for just as long." His smile widened, reaching all the way to his eyes. He leaned in, and I met him halfway. It wasn't a desperate post-trauma kiss. It was a kiss of pure, unadulterated relief. It was a confirmation. A beginning. A promise that no matter how ugly the world got, we had this. We had us. The smell of garlic bread from the oven pulled us apart. He rested his forehead against mine, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. "We're gonna get through this, Emmy," he murmured against my skin. "I know," I said. And for the first time all day, I actually believed it. Paul had wanted to show me that my life here was a fantasy. He'd wanted to prove that he was my only reality. But as I sat in my quiet kitchen, with the smell of my mom's cooking in the air and the steadfast, unwavering love of the man kneeling in front of me, I knew he had it all wrong. This messy, chaotic, beautiful, pig-filled life, this was real, and he was the ghost we were about to exorcise for good. Chapter 9. Paper Shields and Pignappings. The kiss ended, but the connection remained, a warm, humming current in the quiet kitchen. Nash was still kneeling before me, his hands holding mine, his forehead resting against my own. For the first time since Paul's sleek black car had violated my driveway, I felt my own heartbeat, slow and steady, in time with his. The world outside, with its sheriffs and its monsters, was a muffled, distant noise. In here, there was just the scent of my mom's spaghetti sauce, the steady presence of the man who had loved the scrawny tomboy I used to be, and the quiet, miraculous promise of the woman I was becoming. "You two gonna stay like that all night, or are you going to eat?" my mom asked, her voice softer than usual. We broke apart, a little flustered, like teenagers caught by a flashlight. Mom was standing in the doorway, a plate of garlic bread in her hands and a knowing, weary smile on her face. The panic had receded from her eyes, replaced by a fierce maternal resolve. Behind her, my dad stood, his arms crossed over his chest. The stone-cold fury was still there, but it was banked now, a simmering coal of protective rage. They weren't just my parents, they were a united front. My front. Dinner was a surreal affair. We sat around the familiar oak table of my childhood, passing plates of pasta and salad, the motions of a normal family meal overlaid with the day's traumatic events. We didn't talk about Paul, we talked about everything else, with a forced, determined cheerfulness. My dad recounted a particularly dull presentation on Civil War-era tax codes from the conference. My mom detailed her plans for a new, pig-proof, raised-bed garden design, which sounded less like horticulture and more like a blueprint for Fort Knox. Nash, bless his heart, told a long, rambling story about a calf he'd once had to pull from a mud hole, a story I'm sure he'd told a dozen times, but which served its purpose, filling the silence with something other than fear. They were all protecting me, in their own way, building a wall of normalcy around me, brick by conversational brick. And I loved them for it. After dinner, Nash insisted on helping my dad check the latches on all the doors and windows. I watched them from the kitchen, two good, steady men moving through my house, their quiet competence, a balm to my frayed nerves. When Nash finally said his goodbyes, it was with a lingering touch on my arm at the door, and a look that said more than words ever could. "I'll be here at 8 a.m. sharp," he said, his voice low enough for only me to hear. "We'll go to the station together." "You don't have to," I started, the automatic, self-effacing protest rising to my lips. "I do," he cut in, his expression leaving no room for argument. "We do. Together." He squeezed my arm gently before turning and jogging across the lawn, the beam of his flashlight cutting a steady path through the darkness toward home. That night, sleep was a battlefield. Every creak of the old farmhouse, every rustle of leaves outside my window sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I kept seeing Paul's face, twisted in that final terrifying snarl. I kept feeling his hands on me. I finally gave up around 3 a.m., padding downstairs and making myself a cup of chamomile tea. I sat in the dark living room, wrapped in a quilt, watching the moonlit fields. I saw a pair of headlights turn onto the Coltens' long driveway and knew it was Nash, starting his day before the sun even thought about it. The sight was ridiculously comforting. The world was still turning. The cowboy was still there. At 8 o'clock on the dot, his truck rumbled up the drive. He was holding 2 large coffees from the gas station, and his smile was a little tired but reassuringly solid. The sheriff's station was a small, tidy brick building next to the post office. The air inside smelled of stale coffee, disinfectant, and the faint, dusty scent of old paper files. Sheriff Hutchins led us back to his office, a cramped space dominated by a large wooden desk and a wall of filing cabinets. He handed me a sheaf of papers, the formal complaint, and a pen. "Just write down everything you told me yesterday, Emily," he said, his voice gentle. "Take your time. Be as detailed as you can remember. Nash, I'll need a witness statement from you too." I sat at a small table, the coffee Nash had brought me warming my hand, and I wrote. I filled page after page with the ugly, painful truth. The words felt like poison being drawn from a wound. Every detail I put on paper felt like a small piece of myself I was reclaiming. Nash sat across from me, writing his own account, his presence a silent, steady source of strength. When we were done, a deputy took my statement to be notarized. Sheriff Hutchins leaned against his desk, his expression grim. "All right. The temporary restraining order is in effect. Judge Miller signed it this morning before his tea time," he said. "I'll have a deputy drop a copy by the Creekside Inn, but my gut says he's long gone. We put an alert out on his car, but so far, nothing. He likely ditched it and is in a rental by now. These guys know the drill." "So what does this do?" I asked, gesturing to the stack of papers that represented my trauma. "This piece of paper? It means if he comes within 500 yards of you, your home, or your place of work, which is currently your home, we can arrest him on the spot. No questions asked," Hutchins explained. "It's a shield, Emily, but it's a paper shield. The best defense is to be smart. Don't go anywhere alone, keep your phone on you. And call us if a damn leaf blows across your yard funny. You understand?" I nodded, a cold knot forming in my stomach. A paper shield. It felt flimsy, inadequate against a man like Paul. As we walked out of the station and back into the bright, deceptively cheerful morning, a familiar, chirping voice cut through the air. "Well, if it isn't Oak Creek's most talked-about couple, coming from the sheriff's station? My, things must be getting serious." Mildred Miller was standing on the steps of the post office, a stack of letters in one hand and a look of intense, undisguised curiosity on her face. Her lavender-colored hair seemed to vibrate with the sheer power of her inquisitiveness. "Morning, Mildred," Nash said, his tone polite but firm, a clear sign that he was not in the mood for her usual interrogation. Mildred, however, was not one to be deterred. She bustled over, her shrewd eyes scanning my face, noting the faint shadows under my eyes and the raw, healing scrapes on my arms which I hadn't bothered to cover. Her gossipy demeanor fell away, replaced by a surprising, sharp-eyed concern. "Honey, are you all right?" she asked, her voice dropping. "The whole town is buzzing. First that fancy-pants fella at the picnic, and then Hutch's car at your place for 2 hours yesterday. People are saying all sorts of nonsense. I'm fine, Mildred. Just dealing with some things," I said vaguely. She clucked her tongue, shaking her head. "It's that city boy, isn't it? The one in the shiny car. I saw him at the picnic. He had the eyes of a snake oil salesman. Cold. You stay away from a man with cold eyes, Emily. They don't have a soul to warm." She patted my arm, her touch surprisingly gentle. "You listen to me. This town might be full of busybodies, but we look after our own. You let me know if you need anything. Anything at all. My husband's got a 12 gauge and a very itchy trigger finger when it comes to pests." The offer, while slightly alarming, was also deeply touching. Mildred wasn't just a gossip. She was a guardian of the town's unwritten laws, and one of those laws was protecting its own from outsiders with cold eyes. "Thanks, Mildred," I said, and I meant it. The rest of the week passed in a haze of heightened security and suffocating love. My parents canceled all non-essential activities. My dad suddenly found 1,000 projects to do in the barn. My mom insisted on accompanying me everywhere, even to the mailbox at the end of the drive. Nash was a constant, steady presence. He'd appear at the fence line in the morning with coffee, find an excuse to work on a section of fence near our property in the afternoon, and call every night before I went to bed. It was wonderful. And it was driving me insane. I felt like a porcelain doll, carefully placed on a high shelf, surrounded by cotton batting. Everyone was so afraid I would break. I was grateful, but I was also suffocating. The paranoia was a constant low-grade fever. Every car that slowed on the main road was him. Every unfamiliar noise in the night was him. I found myself jumping at shadows, my heart pounding in my chest for no reason. I started to feel like Paul was winning, even in his absence. He'd turned my safe, happy home into a prison, and my family into my wardens. On Saturday, I finally snapped. My dad was fixing A perfectly functional gate hinge for the third time that week, his presence a silent, looming sentinel while I filled the chicken feeders. "Okay, that's it," I said, slamming the feed bucket down. The chickens scattered, squawking in protest. "Dad, I love you. But if you don't find something to do on the other side of this property, I'm going to start throwing eggs." He looked startled, a wrench in his hand. "I was just making sure this was secure. It's secure enough to withstand a nuclear blast," I said, my voice shaking with a week's worth of pent-up frustration. "I can't breathe. I can't think. I feel like I'm trapped, and this is exactly what he wants. He wants me to be scared. He wants me to be small. And I'm not. I need to feel normal again, just for an hour." My dad's expression softened. He put the wrench down and nodded slowly. "You're right, Emmy. I'm sorry. We're just worried." "I know," I said, my anger deflating. "But I need to do this myself. I need to walk around my own home without a security detail." He gave me a long, searching look and then a small, sad smile. "Okay, I'll go check the fence line. The far one." He squeezed my shoulder and walked away, leaving me blessedly, terrifyingly alone. I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs, feeling fresh and free for the first time in days. Just me and the chickens. I finished my chores, my movements feeling lighter, more purposeful. I was taking my space back. I decided to treat Hamlet. He'd been a hero, after all, and deserved a reward beyond my mother's ravaged garden. I grabbed a couple of overripe apples from the kitchen, the sweet, cidery smell filling the air. "Hamlet, I've got something for you, you fuzzy little wrecking ball," I called out as I approached the barn. The late afternoon sun cast long golden stripes through the gaps in the barn walls. It was quiet, the only sound the gentle cooing of pigeons in the rafters. I walked to his pen at the far end of the barn, the one Nash had reinforced with new hinges and a slide bolt that could probably secure a bank vault. The pen was empty. My blood ran cold. "Hamlet?" I called, my voice suddenly tight. "Come on, piggy." "Not funny." My eyes scanned the pen. The gate was closed. The new, heavy-duty slide bolt was securely in place. But the pig was gone. It made no sense. He couldn't have gotten out. Not through that gate. I checked the wooden planks of the walls. No breaks, no holes. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. I ran out of the barn, my eyes scanning the yard, the fields, the garden. Nothing. He wasn't small. He wasn't quiet. A 150-pound pig doesn't just vanish into thin air. I circled back to the barn, my mind racing, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe he'd somehow squeezed through a gap I couldn't see? Maybe he'd dug his way out? I ran my hands over the gate again, my fingers tracing the solid wood, the cool, unyielding metal of the bolt. And then I saw it, tacked to the wooden gate post. Almost hidden in the shadows was a small, cream-colored square of cardstock. The same kind of expensive, heavy cardstock he'd used for the note with the peonies. My hands trembled so violently I could barely pull the single thumbtack from the wood. My name was on the front, written in that same elegant, sharp handwriting. My breath hitched. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. With a deep, steadying breath that did nothing to calm me, I flipped the card over. He's a loud little thing, isn't he? If you want your heroic pet back in one piece, come to the old Miller place at the crossroads. Midnight. Come alone, Emily. No cowboy. No cops. Or, the only part of him you'll get back is the bacon, the world tilted on its axis. The quiet barn, the golden sunlight, the smell of hay. It all receded, replaced by a roaring in my ears. He hadn't left. He'd been watching, waiting. He knew I would eventually push my family away, that I'd need a moment of independence. And he'd used it. He wasn't trying to hurt me this time, not physically. He was trying to break me. He'd taken the one creature who had, in his own chaotic way, saved me. He'd taken my ridiculous, gluttonous Houdini of a pig, and he was using him as bait. My first thought was Nash. My second was Sheriff Hutchins, the paper shield, the 12-gauge. But the words on the card echoed in my head, cold and final. No cowboy, no cops. He would be watching. He would know if I brought help. And he was threatening to kill my pig. My idiotic, zucchini-stealing, heroic pig. I couldn't risk it. I couldn't put Hamlet's life in the hands of a maybe, of a police response that might be too slow. This wasn't about a restraining order anymore. This wasn't a legal battle, this was personal. He had come into my home, attacked me, and now he had taken a part of my family, helpless and innocent, to lure me into a trap. The fear was a living thing, a cold serpent coiling in my gut. But beneath the fear, something else was kindling. A white-hot, diamond-hard rage. He thought this would make me small. He thought this would break me and send me crawling back. He didn't know me at all. I looked at the note in my shaking hand, at the threat against my pig. He had miscalculated. He had thought to use my love for Hamlet as a weakness. He didn't realize he had just handed me a weapon. Because I wasn't just the scrawny tomboy anymore. I wasn't Paul Sanders' terrified ex-girlfriend. I was the woman who loved that pig. And I was coming for him. I shoved the note into my pocket. I strode out of the barn and into the fading sunlight, my purpose clear and cold in my mind. The old Miller place. I knew it. It was an abandoned farmhouse on a deserted stretch of road, miles from anywhere. A perfect place for an ambush. A perfect place for a final confrontation. I wouldn't call Nash. I wouldn't call the sheriff. Not yet. This was my fight. He wanted me alone? He was going to get me alone. But I wouldn't be unarmed. And I sure as hell wasn't going to be a victim. The game was over. It was time to write the ending. Chapter 10. Operation Save Hamlet's Bacon. The note in my hand felt like a shard of ice, and the cold spread from my fingertips through my entire body, leaving a diamond-hard rage in its wake. He thought he could break me with this. He thought he could take my pig, my ridiculous, mud-loving, zucchini-thieving sidekick, and use him as a pawn to lure me into his checkmate. He had miscalculated so badly it was almost laughable. He didn't want to fight with the girl who cried over his manipulative phone calls. He was about to get a fight with the girl who would wade through hell in muddy boots to save her pig. "Okay, Brooks," I whispered to the silent, dust-mote-filled air of the barn. "New plan. We're going to use tactical negotiation. But this time the negotiation involves a distinct possibility of grievous bodily harm. To him. Not the pig." My first, overwhelming instinct was to sprint across the field and pound on Nash's door, but the words on the card were a cold, hard barrier. No cowboy, no cops. Paul was arrogant, but he wasn't stupid. He would be watching, he would have a vantage point. If he saw Nash's truck, if he saw a police car, he would follow through on his threat. I couldn't risk it. This had to be my play. But I wasn't going in blind, and I wasn't going in without a backup plan. I marched back to the house, my mind a whirring engine of logistics and fury. First, I grabbed the tire iron from the emergency kit in my beat-up pickup. It felt heavy and solid in my hand. A good start. Next, I went to the garage and found my dad's mag light, the big 4-battery one made of heavy-duty aluminum. It could illuminate a field or, in a pinch, crack a skull. I tucked it into the back of my jeans. Then, I went to the barn's tool wall. My eyes scanned the hanging implements. Shovels, rakes, hoes. I settled on the pitchfork. It was a little dramatic, sure, but it had reach, and nothing said. "You have underestimated the crazy farm girl, quite like a pitchfork." I decided against carrying it, though. A tire iron and a flashlight were concealable. A pitchfork was a declaration of war. One wasn't ready to make until I was on site. Now for the backup. I couldn't call Nash, but I could leave a trail. I grabbed a pen, and on the back of a feed store receipt, I wrote, "Miller Place. Midnight. He has Hamlet. Don't come until 12:15. Give me a head start. Trust me." The last 2 words were the most important. I needed him to trust that I wasn't being a reckless victim. I was being a soldier. I took the original note from Paul, folded my own note inside it, and ran, my feet pounding against the familiar dirt path across the field to Nash's house. His truck was gone. He was probably out checking on his herd. Perfect. I went up onto his porch and slipped the folded note under his doormat, a place I knew he always checked for spare keys. He would find it. I had to believe that. I spent the next few hours in a state of suspended animation. I made myself eat a sandwich I didn't taste and drink a full glass of water. I changed into dark jeans, a black long-sleeved shirt, and my sturdiest boots. I braided my hair tight against my head. Every time my dad's truck rumbled past the house on his self-appointed patrol, my heart leaped into my throat. I couldn't let him know. I couldn't let anyone know. This was a solo mission. Operation Save Hamlet's Bacon. And failure was not an option. At 11:30 p.m., I slipped out the back door, the tire iron tucked in my jacket, the mag light a heavy weight against my spine. I didn't take my truck, the sound would carry. I took the old ATV my dad used for hauling firewood. Its engine was a low, guttural growl that was less likely to attract attention than my truck's wheezing cough. I took the back roads, the wind cold against my face, my knuckles white on the handlebars. The adrenaline was a high-frequency hum in my veins, sharpening my senses, silencing the fear. The old Miller place was a skeletal ruin against the moonless sky. The farmhouse sagged in on itself, its windows like vacant eyes. The barn was a gaping black maw. I killed the engine a quarter-mile down the road and covered the rest of the distance on foot, moving through the tall, dry grass at the edge of the field like a shadow. As I got closer, I saw a flicker of light from inside the barn, and I heard it. A low, unhappy, and profoundly disgruntled grunt. Hamlet. He was alive. The relief was so sharp and fierce, it almost buckled my knees. I crept to the side of the barn, my back pressed against the weathered, splintery wood. I found a gap where a board had rotted away and peered inside. The scene was illuminated by a single, battery-powered lantern sitting on a hay bale. Paul was there, pacing back and forth, a silhouette of impatient menace. And in the center of the barn, in a small, hastily constructed pen of old pallets, was Hamlet. He was tied to a post by a rope around his stout middle, looking utterly miserable and deeply offended. He let out another mournful grunt, and my rage solidified into a cold, hard stone in my chest. I took a deep breath, slipped the tire iron from my jacket, and walked around to the big, open barn door, my boots silent in the dust. I stepped into the light. "Hello, Paul," I said, my voice as cold and flat as a frozen lake. He spun around, a triumphant, ugly smile spreading across his face. "Emily. Punctual. I knew you'd come. I knew you couldn't resist playing the hero for your disgusting little pet. Let him go," I said, ignoring his taunts. I held the tire iron loosely at my side, letting him see it. His eyes flickered to the metal in my hand, and he laughed, a condescending, humorless sound. "Oh, darling, really? A tire iron? What are you going to do? Change my mind?" "Something like that," I said, taking a slow step into the barn. I kept my eyes on him, but my senses were cataloging everything. The distance between us. The exits. The rusty, three-pronged pitchfork leaning against the far wall. The coil of old rope near the empty stall. This is all so dramatic, Emily. It didn't have to be this way, he said, taking a step toward me. All you had to do was come home with me. We could be in Chicago right now, having a nightcap at the peninsula. But you had to have your little rural fantasy. This isn't a fantasy, Paul. This is my life. The one you tried to burn to the ground, I said. But you're not an arsonist, Paul. You're just a spoiled little boy who throws a tantrum when he doesn't get his toy back. And I am not your toy. His smile vanished, replaced by the cold reptilian fury I'd seen in my barn. You will be again, once you realize you have nothing left here. Once your pet farmer gets tired of your drama. You'll come crawling back. You always do. Not this time, I said. At that moment, Hamlet, who had been watching our exchange with his head cocked, let out a loud, indignant squeal. He hated the rope. He hated the pen. And he had clearly decided he'd had enough of this nonsense. He lunged against the rope, not with frantic panic, but with the stubborn, single-minded determination of a pig who really, really wants to be somewhere else. The post he was tied to was old and rotted at the base. It groaned, tilted, and then with a splintering crack, it gave way. Paul and I both stared as Hamlet, now dragging a 6-foot fence post behind him, trotted purposefully toward the only familiar and comforting thing in the entire barn. Me. Hamlet? No, I yelped, but it was too late. Paul, seeing his leverage literally walking away, made a grab for the trailing rope. It was a foolish, impulsive move. Hamlet, feeling the tug, let out another furious squeal and picked up speed. The heavy post at the end of the rope swung in a wide, chaotic arc, catching Paul squarely in the back of the knees. His legs went out from under him, and he went down with a surprised grunt, landing hard in the dirt and hay. It was the opening I needed. I didn't hesitate. I charged forward, not at Paul, but at the pitchfork against the wall. I grabbed its long wooden handle, the worn wood familiar in my hands. I spun around, leveling the 3 sharp tines at Paul's chest as he scrambled to get up. "Stay down," I snarled, my voice a low, animalistic growl I didn't recognize as my own. He froze, his eyes wide, fixed on the sharp points of the tines hovering a foot from his expensive shirt. The condescension was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was a flicker of genuine primal fear. He finally understood. I wasn't the girl he could control anymore. And that's when the headlights flooded the barn. 2 of them, bright, powerful, and accompanied by the thunderous roar of a diesel engine. Nash's F-250 came to a screeching halt just outside, pinning Paul in a brilliant, inescapable spotlight. Nash jumped out of the driver's side. He wasn't alone. My dad got out of the passenger's side, his face a grim, stony mask, a heavy-duty aluminum baseball bat clutched in his hand. And from the back, Sheriff Hutchins emerged, his hand resting calmly on the butt of his service weapon. Nash had gotten my note, and he had, apparently, decided that, no cops, was more of a suggestion than a rule. I had never been so happy to see someone ignore my instructions in my entire life. Nash's eyes found me first, standing with a pitchfork leveled at Paul, with Hamlet nudging my leg, post still in tow. His face was a mixture of terror, relief, and a fierce, blazing pride that made my heart swell. "Drop the pitchfork, Emmy," Sheriff Hutchins said, his voice calm and authoritative as he walked into the barn, his gaze locked on Paul. I lowered it slowly. The fight was over. Paul stared at the 3 men advancing on him, his face pale in the truck's headlights. He looked from Nash's cold fury to my dad's righteous rage, to the sheriff's calm, implacable authority. He was surrounded, outmaneuvered, beaten. He slumped back against a hay bale, a pathetic, defeated man in a ruined barn. "Paul Sanders," Hutchins said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "You're under arrest for kidnapping, assault, and violating a restraining order. And," he added, glancing at Hamlet, who was now trying to eat Paul's leather shoe, "I'm pretty sure I can make pig-napping stick, too." The falling action was a blur of flashing lights and quiet efficiency. Another deputy arrived. Paul was cuffed and read his rights, not even looking at me as they led him away and put him in the back of the squad car. A ghost, finally being exorcised. My dad gave me a bone-crushing hug that told me I was grounded until I was 40, and that he had never been more proud of me. Sheriff Hutchins took my final statement, a look of weary admiration in his eyes. Nash, my beautiful, steadfast Nash, untied Hamlet, the pig, finally free, celebrated by promptly trying to eat the tire of the F-250. It took all 3 of us, me, Nash, and my dad, to corral the greasy, ungrateful, heroic pig into the back of Nash's truck for the ride home. The drive was quiet. My dad followed behind us, a silent, protective escort. I sat beside Nash in the cab, the heater blasting, my adrenaline finally giving way to a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. Hamlet occasionally banged his trailing fence post against the truck bed, a chaotic drumbeat celebrating his liberation. Nash reached over and took my hand, his thumbs stroking my knuckles. "You were amazing," he said, his voice thick with emotion. When I found that note, I swear my heart stopped. But then I read the last part, "Trust me." And I did. "I'm glad you didn't trust me enough to come alone," I admitted, leaning my head against the cool glass of the window. "Never," he said fiercely. "Not with you. Not ever again." When we pulled into my driveway, my mom was on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, her face illuminated by the porch light. The relief on her face when she saw me was so profound it was painful to watch. After Hamlet was safely back in his newly fortified pen, minus his fence post, and my parents had finally gone inside, convinced I was not going to run off and fight any more supervillains that night, Nash and I were left alone on the porch swing. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, the black turning to a deep, bruised purple. The crickets had been replaced by the first few tentative chirps of the morning birds. A new day was dawning. "He's really gone this time, isn't he?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "He is," Nash confirmed. He slipped his arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. "With your statement, your dad's lawyer brother on the case, and about 5 different charges, he's not going to be bothering anyone for a very long time." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the colors of the sunrise bleed across the horizon. All the drama, the fear, the running. It was over. We had made it to the other side. "You know," I said, turning to look at him, at his strong, kind face in the soft morning light. For a while there, I thought I'd never get my classic love story. His gaze softened, and a slow, beautiful smile spread across his face. "What, you mean this, wasn't it? A damsel in distress, a villain, a hero, and a pig?" I laughed, a real, happy sound. "Okay, when you put it like that, it's a definite contender. But I was thinking of something a little quieter." He leaned in, his lips brushing mine, a kiss as soft and as full of promise as the dawn. "I think I can give you that," he murmured against my mouth. "I love you, Emmy Brooks. I think I have for a very long time." "I love you too, Nash Colten," I whispered back, my heart so full I thought it might burst. My hero. A month later, I was sitting on that same porch swing, a laptop open on my knees. I was designing a website for a local apple orchard, the first official client of Brooks Marketing Solutions. Nash was leaning against the railing, sipping a beer, watching me with that same proud, loving look on his face. My life was blessedly, beautifully quiet. The only drama was the ongoing war between my dad and the squirrels, and the fact that Hamlet had recently figured out how to unlatch the screen door if you didn't lock it just right. He was currently trying to do just that, his wet snout leaving prints all over the mesh. "No you don't, you fuzzy little felon," I called out. "There's a pie cooling on that counter, and it has your name written all over it, and not in a good way." Nash laughed, a deep, easy sound that had become the soundtrack to my life. He came and sat beside me on the swing, his arms settling around me as if it had always belonged there. "You know," he said, kissing the top of my head, "I think this is a pretty classic love story after all." I looked at him, my cowboy, my protector, my love. I looked at our two farms, side by side. I looked at my ridiculous pig, now attempting to sweet-talk a particularly interested chicken. And I knew he was right. It wasn't the story I had expected. It was messy and chaotic. And it came with a whole lot of mud and a distinct lack of fancy champagne. But it was ours. And it was perfect.